Section 61 of The Genius by Theodore Dreiser. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 2, Chapter 32. The Summerfield Advertising Agency, of which Mr. Daniel C. Summerfield was president, was one of those curious exfoliations or efflorescences of the personality of a single individual which is so often met with in the business world, and which always means a remarkable individual behind them. The ideas, the enthusiasm, the strength of Mr. Daniel C. Summerfield was all there was to the Summerfield Advertising Agency. It was true that there was a large force of men working for him, advertising canvassers, advertising writers, financial accountants, artists, stenographers, bookkeepers, and the like. But they were all, as it were, an emanation or irradiation of the personality of Mr. Daniel C. Summerfield. He was small, wiry, black-haired, black-eyed, black-mustached, with an olive complexion and even, pleasing, albeit sometimes wolfish, white teeth, which indicated a disposition as avid and hungry as a disposition well might be. Mr. Summerfield had come up into his present state of affluence, or comparative affluence, from the direst poverty, and by the directest route, his personal efforts. In the state in which he had originated, Alabama, his family had been known, in the small circle to which they were known at all, as poor white trash. His father had been a rather lackadaisical, half-starved cotton planter, who had been satisfied with a single bale or less of cotton to the acre on the ground which he leased, and who drove a lean mule, very much the worse for age and wear, up and down the furrows of his leaner fields, the while he complained of the misery in his breast. He was afflicted with slow consumption, or thought he was, which was just as effective, and in addition had hookworm, though that parasitic producer of hopeless tiredness was not yet discovered and named. Daniel Christopher, his eldest son, had been raised with scarcely any education, having been put in a cotton mill at the age of 7. But nevertheless he had soon manifested himself as the brain of the family. For 4 years he worked in the cotton mill, and then, because of his unusual brightness, he had been given a place in the printing shop of the Wickham Union, where he was so attractive to the slow-going proprietor that he soon became foreman of the printing department and then manager. He knew nothing of printing or newspapers at that time, but the little contact he obtained here soon cleared his vision. He saw instantly what the newspaper business was, and decided to enter it. Later, as he grew older, he suspected that no one knew very much about advertising as yet, or very little, and that he was called by God to revise it. With this vision of a still wider field of usefulness in his mind, he began at once to prepare himself for it, reading all manner of advertising literature and practicing the art of display and effective statement. He had been through such bitter things as personal fights with those who worked under him, knocking one man down with a heavy iron form key, personal altercation with his own father and mother, in which he frankly told them that they were failures, and that they had better let him show them something about regulating their hopeless lives. He had quarreled with his younger brothers, trying to dominate them, and had succeeded in controlling the youngest, principally for the very good reason that he had become foolishly fond of him. This younger brother he later introduced into his advertising business. He had religiously saved the little he had earned thus far, invested a part of it in the further development of the Wickham Union, bought his father an 8-acre farm, which he showed him how to work, and finally decided to come to New York to see if he could not connect himself with some important advertising concern where he could learn something more about the one thing that interested him. He was already married, and he brought his young wife with him from the South. He soon connected himself as a canvasser with one of the great agencies, and advanced rapidly. He was so smiling, so bland, so insistent, so magnetic, that business came to him rapidly. He became the star man in this New York concern, and Alfred Cookman, who was its owner and manager, was soon pondering what he could do to retain him. No individual or concern could long retain Daniel C. Summerfield, however, once he understood his personal capabilities. In 2 years he had learned all that Alfred Cookman had to teach him, and more than he could teach him. He knew his customers and what their needs were, and where the lack was in the service which Mr. Cookman rendered them. He foresaw the drift toward artistic representation of saleable products, and decided to go into that side of it. He would start an agency which would render a service so complete and dramatic that anyone who could afford to use his service would make money. When Eugene first heard of this agency, the Summerfield concern was 6 years old and rapidly growing. It was already very large and profitable, and as hard and forceful as its owner. Daniel C. Summerfield, sitting in his private office, was absolutely ruthless in his calculations as to men. He had studied the life of Napoleon and had come to the conclusion that no individual life was important. Mercy was a joke to be eliminated from business. Sentiment was silly twaddle. The thing to do was to hire men as cheaply as possible, to drive them as vigorously as possible, and to dispose of them quickly when they showed signs of weakening under the strain. He had already had 5 art directors in as many years, had hired and fired, as he termed it, innumerable canvassers, ad writers, bookkeepers, stenographers, artists, getting rid of anyone and everyone who showed the least sign of incapacity or inefficiency. The great office floor which he maintained was a model of cleanliness, order, one might also say beauty of a commercial sort, but it was the cleanliness, order, and beauty of a hard polished and well-oiled machine. Daniel C. Summerfield was not much more than that, but he had long ago decided that was what he must be in order not to be a failure, a fool, as he called it, a mark, and he admired himself for being so. When Mr. Baker Bates, at Hudson Dula's request, went to Mr. Summerfield in regard to the rumored vacancy which really existed, the latter was in a most receptive frame of mind. He had just come into 2 very important advertising contracts which required a lot of imagination and artistic skill to execute, and he had lost his art director because of a row over a former contract. It was true that in very many cases, in most cases in fact, his customers had very definite ideas as to what they wanted to say and how they wanted to say it, but not always. They were almost always open to suggestions as to modifications and improvements, and in a number of very important cases they were willing to leave the entire theory of procedure to the Summerfield Advertising Company. This called for rare good judgment, not only in the preparation, but in the placing of these ads. And it was in the matter of their preparation, the many striking ideas which they should embody, that the judgment and assistance of a capable art director of real imagination was most valuable. As has already been said, Mr. Summerfield had had 5 art directors in almost as many years. In each case he had used the Napoleonic method of throwing a fresh, unwearied mind into the breach of difficulty, and when it wearied or broke under the strain, tossing it briskly out. There was no compunction or pity connected with any detail of this method. "I hire good men, and I pay them good wages," was his favorite comment. "Why shouldn't I expect good results?" If he was wearied or angered by failure, he was prone to exclaim, "These goddamn cattle of artists, what can you expect of them? They don't know anything outside their little theory of how things ought to look. They don't know anything about life. Why, goddamn it, they're like a lot of children. Why should anybody pay any attention to what they think? Who cares what they think? They give me a pain in the neck." Mr. Daniel C. Summerfield was very much given to swearing, more as a matter of habit than of foul intention, and no picture of him would be complete without the interpolation of his favorite expressions. When Eugene appeared on the horizon as a possible applicant for this delightful position, Mr. Daniel C. Summerfield was debating with himself just what he should do in connection with the 2 new contracts in question. The advertisers were awaiting his suggestions eagerly. One was for the nationwide advertising of a new brand of sugar. The second for the international display of ideas in connection with a series of French perfumes, the sale of which depended largely upon the beauty with which they could be interpreted to the lay mind. The latter were not only to be advertised in the United States and Canada, but in Mexico also, and the fulfillment of the contracts in either case was dependent upon the approval given by the advertisers to the designs for newspaper, car, and billboard advertising which he should submit. It was a ticklish business worth $200,000 in ultimate profits, and naturally he was anxious that the man who should sit in the seat of authority in his art department should be one of real force and talent, a genius if possible, who should, through his ideas, help him win his golden harvest. The right man naturally was hard to find. The last man had been only fairly capable. He was dignified, meditative, thoughtful, with considerable taste and apprehension as to what the material situation required in driving home simple ideas, but he had no great imaginative grasp of life. In fact, no man who had ever sat in his art director's chair had ever really suited Mr. Summerfield. According to him, they had all been weaklings, dubs, fakes, hot air artists were some of his descriptions of them. Their problem, however, was a hard one, for they had to think very vigorously in connection with any product which he might be trying to market, and to offer him endless suggestions as to what would be the next best thing for a manufacturer to say or do to attract attention to what he had to sell. It might be a catch phrase such as, "Have you seen this new soap?" or "Do you know Ceresta? It's red." It might be that a novelty in the way of hand or fingers, eye or mouth was all that was required, carrying some appropriate explanation in type. Sometimes, as in the case of very practical products, their very practical display in some clear, interesting, attractive way was all that was needed. In most cases, though, something radically new was required. For it was the theory of Mr. Summerfield that his ads must not only arrest the eye, but fix themselves in the memory, and convey a fact which was, or at least could be made to seem important to the reader. It was a struggling with one of the deepest and almost interesting phases of human psychology. The last man, older Freeman, had been of considerable use to him in his way. He had collected about him a number of fairly capable artists, men temporarily down on their luck, who, like Eugene, were willing to take a working position of this character, and from them he had extracted by dint of pleading, cajoling, demonstrating, and the like, a number of interesting ideas. Their working hours were from 9 to 5:30, their pay meager, 18 to 35, with experts drawing in several instances $50 and $60, and their tasks innumerable and really never ending. Their output was regulated by a tabulated record system which kept account of just how much they succeeded in accomplishing in a week, and how much it was worth to the concern. The ideas on which they worked were more or less products of the brains of the art director and his superior, though they occasionally themselves made important suggestions. But for their proper execution, the amount of time spent on them, the failures sustained, the art director was more or less responsible. He could not carry to his employer a poor drawing of a good idea, or a poor idea for something which required a superior thought and long hope to retain his position. Mr. Daniel C. Summerfield was too shrewd and too exacting. He was really tireless in his energy. It was his art director's business, he thought, to get him good ideas for good drawings, and then to see that they were properly and speedily executed. Anything less than this was sickening failure in the eyes of Mr. Summerfield, and he was not at all bashful in expressing himself. As a matter of fact, he was at times terribly brutal. "Why the hell do you show me a thing like that?" he once exclaimed to Freeman. "Jesus Christ, I could hire an ashman and get better results. My God damn it, look at the drawing of the arm of that woman. Look at her ear. Who's going to take a thing like that? It's tame, it's punk, it's a joke. What sort of cattle have you got out there working for you anyhow? Why, if the Summerfield Advertising Company can't do better than that, I might as well shut up the place and go fishing." We'll be a joke in 6 weeks. Don't try to hand me any such goddamn tripe as that, Freeman. You know better. You ought to know our advertisers wouldn't stand for anything like that. Wake up. I'm paying you $5,000 a year. How do you expect I'm going to get my money back out of any such arrangement as that? You're simply wasting my money and your time letting a man draw a thing like that. Hell. The art director, whoever he was, having been by degrees initiated into the brutalities of the situation, and having, by reason of the time he had been employed and the privileges he had permitted himself on account of his comfortable and probably never before experienced salary, sold himself into bondage to his now financial necessities, was usually humble and tractable under the most galling fire. Where could he go and get $5,000 a year for his services? How could he live at the rate he was living if he lost this place? Art directorships were not numerous. Men who could fill them fairly acceptably were not impossible to find. If he thought at all, and he was not a heaven-born genius, serene in the knowledge of his God-given powers, he was very apt to hesitate, to worry, to be humble, and to endure a good deal. Most men under similar circumstances do the same thing. They think before they fling back into the teeth of their oppressor some of the slurs and brutal characterizations which so frequently issue therefrom. Most men do. Besides, there is almost a high percentage of truth in the charges made. Usually the storm is for the betterment of mankind. Mr. Summerfield knew this. He knew also the yoke of poverty and the bondage of fear which most, if not all his men were under. He had no compunction about using these weapons, much as a strong man might use a club. He had had a hard life himself. No one had sympathized with him very much. Besides, you couldn't sympathize and succeed. Better look the facts in the face, deal only with infinite capacity, roughly weed out the incompetents, and proceed along the line of least resistance, in so far as your powerful enemies were concerned. Men might theorize and theorize until the crack of doom, but this was the way things had to be done, and this was the way he preferred to do it. Eugene had never heard of any of these facts in connection with the Summerfield Company. The idea had been flung at him so quickly he had no time to think, and besides, if he had had time, it would have made no difference. A little experience of life had taught him, as it teaches everyone else, to mistrust rumor. He had applied for the place on hearing, and he was hoping to get it. At noon, the day following his visit to Mr. Baker Bates, the latter was speaking for him to Mr. Summerfield, but only very casually. "Say," he asked, quite apropos of nothing apparently, for they were discussing the chances of his introducing his product in South America, "do you ever have need of an art director over in your place?" "Occasionally," replied Summerfield guardedly, for his impression was that Mr. Baker Bates knew very little of art directors or anything else in connection with the art side of advertising life. He might have heard of his present need and be trying to palm off some friend of his, and incompetent, of course, on him. What makes you ask? "Why, Hudson Dula, the manager of the Triple Lithographic Company, was telling me of a man who is connected with the World, who might make a good one for you. I know something of him. He painted some remarkable views of New York and Paris here a few years ago. Dula tells me they were very good." "Is he young?" interrupted Summerfield, calculating. "Yes, comparatively. 31 or 2, I should say." "And he wants to be an art director, does he? Where is he?" "He's down on the World, and I understand he wants to get out of there. I heard you say last year that you were looking for a man, and I thought this might interest you." "What's he doing down on the World?" "He's been sick, I understand, and is just getting on his feet again." The explanation sounded sincere enough to Summerfield. "What's his name?" he asked. "Witla, Eugene Witla. He had an exhibition at one of the galleries here a few years ago." "I'm afraid of these regular highbrow artists," observed Summerfield suspiciously. "They're usually so set up about their art that there's no living with them. I have to have someone with hard, practical sense in my work, someone that isn't a plain damn fool. He has to be a good manager, good administrator. Mere talent for drawing won't do, though he has to have that. or know it when he sees it. You might send this fellow around sometime if you know him. I wouldn't mind looking at him. I may need a man pretty soon. I'm thinking of making certain changes." "If I see him, I will," said Baker indifferently, and dropped the matter. Summerfield, however, for some psychological reason, was impressed with the name. Where had he heard it? Somewhere, apparently. Perhaps he had better find out something about him. "If you send him, you'd better give him a letter of introduction," he added thoughtfully, before Bates should have forgotten the matter. "So many people try to get in to see me, I may forget." Baker knew at once that Summerfield wished to look at Witla. He dictated a letter of introduction that afternoon to a stenographer and mailed it to Eugene. "I find Mr. Summerfield apparently disposed to see you," he wrote. "You had better go and see him if you are interested. Present this letter. Very truly yours." Eugene looked at it with astonishment and a sense of foregoneness, so far as what was to follow. Fate was fixing this for him. He was going to get it. How strange life was. Here he was down on the world, working for $50 a week, and suddenly an art directorship, a thing he had thought of for years, was coming to him out of nowhere. Then he decided to telephone Mr. Daniel Summerfield, saying that he had a letter from Mr. Baker Bates and asking him when he could see him. Later he decided to waste no time, but to present the letter direct without phoning. At 3 in the afternoon he received permission from Benedict to be away from the office between 3 and 5, and at 3:30 he was in the anteroom of the general offices of the Summerfield Advertising Company, waiting for a much desired permission to enter. End of section 61. Section 62 of The Genius by Theodore Dreiser. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 2, Chapter 33. When Eugene called, Mr. Daniel C. Summerfield was in no great rush about any particular matter, but he had decided in this case, as he had in many others, that it was very important that anyone who wanted anything from him should be made to wait. Eugene was made to wait a solid hour before he was informed by an underling that he was very sorry, but that other matters had so detained Mr. Summerfield that it was now impossible for him to see him at all this day, but that tomorrow at 12 he would be glad to see him. Eugene was finally admitted on the morrow, however, and then, at the first glance, Mr. Summerfield liked him. A man of intelligence, he thought, as he leaned back in his chair and stared at him. A man of force, young still, wide-eyed, quick, clean-looking. Perhaps I have found someone in this man who will make a good art director. He smiled, for Summerfield was always good-natured in his opening relationships, usually so in all of them, and took most people, his employees, and prospective employees particularly, with an air of superior but genial condescension. Sit down," he exclaimed cheerfully, and Eugene did so, looking about at the handsomely decorated walls, the floor, which was laid with a wide, soft, light brown rug, and the mahogany desk, flat-topped, glass-covered, on which lay handsome ornaments of silver, ivory, and bronze. This man looked so keen, so dynamic, like a polished Japanese carving, hard and smooth. "Now tell me all about yourself," began Summerfield. "Where do you come from? Who are you? What have you done?" Hold," said Eugene easily and tolerantly. "Not so fast. My history isn't so much the short and simple annals of the poor. I'll tell you in 2 or 3 sentences." Summerfield was a little taken back at this abruptness, which was generated by his own attitude. Still, he liked it. This was something new to him. His applicant wasn't frightened or apparently even nervous so far as he could judge. He is droll, he thought, sufficiently so. A man who has seen a number of things evidently. He is easy in manner, too, and kindly. "Well," he said smilingly, for Eugene's slowness appealed to him. His humor was something new in art directors. So far as he could recall, his predecessors had never had any to speak of. "Well, I'm an artist," said Eugene, "working on the world. Let's hope that doesn't militate against me very much." "It don't," said Summerfield. "And I want to become an art director because I think I'd make a good one." "Why?" asked Summerfield, his even teeth showing amiably. "Well, because I like to manage men, or I think I do, and they take to me." "You know that?" "I do. In the next place, I know too much about art to want to do the little things that I'm doing. I can do bigger things." "I like that also," applauded Summerfield. He was thinking that Eugene was nice and good looking, a little pale and thin to be wholly forceful, perhaps, but he wasn't sure. His hair was a little too long, his manner perhaps a bit too deliberate. Still, he was nice. Why did he wear a soft hat? Why did artists always insist on wearing soft hats, most of them? It was so ridiculous, so unbusinesslike. "How much do you get," he added, "if it's a fair question?" "Less than I'm worth," said Eugene. "Only $50. But I took it as a sort of health cure. I had a nervous breakdown several years ago. Better now, as Mulvaney used to say. And I don't want to stay at that. I'm an art director by temperament, or I think I am. Anyhow, here I am." "You mean," said Summerfield, "you never ran an art department before?" "Never." "Know anything about advertising?" "I used to think so." "How long ago was that?" "When I worked on the Alexandria, Illinois, Daily Appeal." Summerfield smiled. He couldn't help it. "That's almost as important as the Wickham Union, I fancy. It sounds as if it might have the same wide influence." "Oh, much more, much more," returned Eugene quietly. "The Alexandria Appeal had the largest exclusively country circulation of any county south of Sangamon." I see," replied Summerfield good-humoredly. "It's all day with the Wickham Union. Well, how was it you came to change your mind?" "Well, I got a few years older, for one thing," said Eugene. "And then I decided that I was cut out to be the greatest living artist. And then I came to New York, and in the excitement I almost lost the idea." "I see." "But I have it again, thank heaven, tied up back of the house, and here I am." "Well, Witla, to tell you the truth, you don't look like a real live, everyday, sure enough art director, but you might make good. You're not quite arty enough according to the standards that prevail around this office. Still, I might be willing to take one gosh awful chance. I suppose if I do, I'll get stung as usual. But I've been stung so often that I ought to be used to it by now. I feel sort of spotted at times from the hornets I've hired in the past. But be that as it may, what do you think you could do with a real live art directorships if you had it?" Eugene mused. This persiflage entertained him. He thought Summerfield would hire him now that they were together. "Oh, I'd draw my salary first, and then I'd see that I had the proper system of approach so that anyone who came to see me would think I was the King of England. And then I'd—" "I was really busy yesterday," interpolated Summerfield apologetically. "I'm satisfied of that," replied Eugene gaily. "And finally, I might condescend, if I were coaxed enough, to do a little work." This speech at once irritated and amused Mr. Summerfield. He liked a man of spirit. You could do something with someone who wasn't afraid, even if he didn't know so much to begin with. And Eugene knew a good deal, he fancied. Besides, his talk was precisely in his own sarcastic, semi-humorous vein. Coming from Eugene, it did not sound so hard as it would have coming from himself. But it had his own gay, bantering attitude of mind in it. He believed Eugene could make good. He wanted to try him instanter, anyhow. "Well, I'll tell you what, Witla," he finally observed. "I don't know whether you can run this thing or not. The probabilities are all against you, as I have said. But you seem to have some ideas, or what might be made, some under my direction, and I think I'll give you a chance. Mind you, I haven't much confidence. My personal likes usually prove very fatal to me. Still, you're here, and I like your looks, and I haven't seen anyone else, and so—" "Thanks," said Eugene. "Don't thank me. You have a hard job ahead of you if I take you. It's no child's play. You'd better come with me first and look over the place." And he led the way out into the great central room, where, because it was still noontime, there were few people working, but where one could see just how imposing this business really was. 72 stenographers, bookkeepers, canvassers, and writers, and trade aid people at their desks, he observed, with an easy wave of his hand, and moved on into the art department, which was in another wing of the building, where a north and east light could be secured. "Here's where you come in," he observed, throwing open the door, where 32 artists' desks and easels were ranged. Eugene was astonished. "You don't employ that many, do you?" he asked interestedly. Most of the men were out to lunch. 20 to 25 all the time, sometimes more, he said. "Some on the outside. It depends on the conditions of business." "And how much do you pay them, as a rule?" "Well, that depends. I think I'll give you $75 a week to begin with. If we come to an understanding, if you make good, I'll make it $100 a week inside of 3 months. It all depends. The others we don't pay so much. The business manager can tell you." Eugene noticed the evasion. His eyes narrowed. Still, there was a good chance here. $75 was considerably better than 50, and it might lead to more. He would be his own boss, a man of some consequence. He could not help stiffening with pride a little as he looked at the room which Summerfield pointed out to him as his own if he came. A room where a large, highly polished oak desk was placed, and where some of the Summerfield Advertising Company's art products were hung on the walls. There was a nice rug on the floor and some leather-backed chairs. "Here's where you will be if you come here," said Summerfield. Eugene gazed round. Certainly life was looking up. How was he to get this place? On what did it depend? His mind was running forward to various improvements in his affairs. A better apartment for Angela, better clothes for her, more entertainment for both of them, freedom from worry over the future, for a little bank account would soon result from a place like this. "Do you do much business a year?" Eugene asked curiously. "Oh, about $2 million worth." "And you have to make drawings for every ad?" "Exactly. Not one but 6 or 8 sometimes. It depends upon the ability of the art director. If he does his work right, I save money." Eugene saw the point. "What became of the other man?" he asked, noting the name of older Freeman on the door. "Oh, he quit," said Summerfield. "Or rather, he saw what was coming and got out of the way. He was no good. He was too weak. He was turning out work here which was a joke. Some things had to be done over 8 and 9 times." Eugene discovered the wrath and difficulties and opposition which went with this. Summerfield was a hard man, plainly. He might smile and joke now, but anyone who took that chair would hear from him constantly. For a moment Eugene felt as though he could not do it, as though he had better not try it, and then he thought, "Why shouldn't I? It can't hurt me. If worse comes to worst, I have my art to fall back on." "Well, so it goes," he said. "If I don't make good, the door for mine, I suppose." "No, no, nothing so easy," chuckled Summerfield. "The coal chute." Eugene noticed that he champed his teeth like a nervous horse, and that he seemed fairly to radiate waves of energy. For himself, he winced the least bit. This was a grim, fighting atmosphere he was coming into. He would have to fight for his life here, no doubt of that. "Now," said Summerfield, when they were strolling back to his own office, "I'll tell you what you might do. I have 2 propositions, one from the Sand Perfume Company and another from the American Crystal Sugar Refining Company, which may mean big contracts for me if I can present them the right line of ideas for advertising. They want to advertise. The Sand Company wants suggestions for bottles, labels, car ads, newspaper ads, posters, and so on. The American Crystal Company wants to sell its sugar in small packages, powdered, grained, cubed, hexagoned. We want package forms, labels, posters, ads. and so on for that. It's a question of how much novelty, simplicity, and force we can put in the smallest possible space. Now, I depend upon my art director to tell me something about these things. I don't expect him to do everything. I'm here, and I'll help him. I have men in the trade aid department out there who are wonders at making suggestions along this line. But the art director is supposed to help. He's the man who is supposed to have the taste and can execute the proposition in its last form. Now suppose you take these two ideas and see what you can do with them. Bring me some suggestions. If they suit me, and I think you have the right note, I'll hire you. If not, well then I won't. And no harm done. Is that all right? That's all right, said Eugene. Mr. Summerfield handed him a bundle of papers, catalogs, prospectuses, communications. You can look these over if you want to. Take them along and then bring them back. Eugene rose. I'd like to have 2 or 3 days for this, he said. It's a new proposition to me. I think I can give you some ideas. I'm not sure. Anyhow, I'd like to try. Go ahead, said Summerfield. The more the merrier. And I'll see you any time you're ready. I have a man out there, Freeman's assistant, who's running things for me temporarily. Here's luck, and he waved his hand indifferently. Eugene went out. Was there ever such a man, so hard, so cold, so practical? It was a new note to him. He was simply astonished, largely because he was inexperienced. He had not yet gone up against the business world as those who try to do anything in a big way commercially must. This man was getting on his nerves already, making him feel that he had a tremendous problem before him, making him think that the quiet realms of art were merely the backwaters of oblivion. Those who did anything, who were out there in the front row of effort, were fighters such as this man was, raw products of the soil, ruthless, superior, indifferent. If only he could be that way, he thought. If he could be strong, defiant, commanding, what a thing it would be. Not to wince, not to quail, but to stand up firm, square to the world, and make people obey. Oh, what a splendid vision of empire was here before him. End of section 62. Section 63 of The Genius by Theodore Dreiser. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 2, Chapter 34. The designs or suggestions which Eugene offered his prospective employer for the advertising of the products of M. Sand et Cie and the American Crystal Sugar Refining Company were peculiar. As had been indicated, Eugene had one of those large, effervescent intelligences which, when he was in good physical condition, fairly bubbled ideas. His imaginings, without any effort on his part, naturally took all forms and shapes. The call of Mr. Summerfield was for streetcar cards, posters, and newspaper ads of various sizes, and what he wanted Eugene specifically to supply was not so much the lettering, or rather wording, of the ads, as it was their artistic form and illustrative point. What one particular suggestion in the form of a drawing or design could be made in each case which would arrest public attention. Eugene went home and took the sugar proposition under consideration first. He did not say anything of what he was really doing to Angela, because he did not want to disappoint her. He pretended that he was making sketches which he might offer to some company for a little money, and because it amused him. By the light of his green shaded working lamp at home, he sketched designs of hands holding squares of sugar, either in the fingers or by silver and gold sugar tongs, urns piled high with crystalline concoctions, a blue and gold after dinner cup with one lump of the new form on the side against a section of snow white tablecloth, and things of that character. He worked rapidly and with ease until he had some 35 suggestions on this one proposition alone, and then he turned his attention to the matter of perfumery. His first thought was that he did not know all the designs of the company's bottles, but he originated peculiar and delightful shapes of his own, some of which were afterwards adopted by the company. He designed boxes and labels to amuse himself, and then made various still life compositions, such as a box, a bottle, a dainty handkerchief, and a small white hand, all showing in a row. His mind slipped to the manufacture of perfume, the growing of flowers, the gathering of blossoms, the type of girls and men that might possibly be employed. And then he hurried to the great public library the next day to see if he could find the book or magazine article which would tell him something about it. He found this in several articles on sugar growing and refining, which gave him new ideas in that direction. He decided that in each case he would put a beautifully designed bottle of perfume or a handsome package of sugar, say, in the upper right or lower left-hand corner of the design, and then for the rest show some scene in the process of its manufacture. He began to think of men who could carry out his ideas brilliantly, if they were not already on his staff, letterers, character artists, men with a keen sense of color combination whom he might possibly hire cheaply. He thought of Jerry Matthews of the old Chicago Globe days. Where was he now? And Philip Schottmeyer, who would be almost ideal to work under his direction, for he was a splendid letterer, and Henry Hare, still of the World, with whom he had frequently talked on the subject of ads and posters. Then there was young Morgenbau, who was a most excellent character man, looking to him for some opportunity, and 8 or 10 men whose work he had admired in the magazines, the best known ones. He decided first to see what could be done with the staff that he had, and then to eliminate and fill in as rapidly as possible until he had a capable working group. He had already caught by contact with Summerfield some of that eager personage's ruthlessness and began to manifest it in his own attitude. He was most impressionable to things advantageous to himself, and this chance to rise to a higher level out of the slough of poverty in which he had so greatly suffered nerved him to the utmost effort. In 2 days he had a most impressive mass of material to show his prospective employer, and he returned to his presence with considerable confidence. The latter looked over his ideas carefully and then began to warm to his attitude of mind. "I should say," he said generously, "that there's some life to this stuff. I can see you getting $5,000 a year all right if you keep on. You're a little new, but you've caught the drift." And he sat down to show him where some improvements from a practical point of view could be made. "Now, Professor," he said finally, when he was satisfied that Eugene was the man he wanted, "you and I might as well call this a deal. It's pretty plain to me that you've got something I want. Some of these things are fine. I don't know how you're going to make out as a master of men, but you might as well take that desk out there and we'll begin right now. I wish you luck, I really do. You're a live wire, I think." Eugene thrilled with satisfaction. This was the result he wanted. No half-hearted commendation, but enthusiastic praise. He must have it. He always felt that he could command it. People naturally ran after him. He was getting used to it by now, taking it as a matter of course. If he hadn't broken down, curse the luck, think where he could have been today. He had lost 5 years, and he was not quite well yet, but thank God he was getting steadily better, and he would try and hold himself in check from now on. The world demanded it. He went out with Summerfield into the art room, and was there introduced by him to the various men employed. Mr. Davis, Mr. Witla, Mr. Hart, Mr. Witla, Mr. Clemens, Mr. Witla. So it went, and the staff was soon aware of who he was. Summerfield then took him into the next room and introduced him to the various heads of departments, the business manager, who fixed his and his artist's salaries, the cashier who paid him, the manager of the ad writing department, the manager of the trade aid department, and the head of the stenographic department, a woman. Eugene was a little disgusted with what he considered the crassness of these people, After the quality of the art atmosphere in which he had moved, these people seemed to him somewhat raw and voracious, like fish. They had no refinement. Their looks and manners were unduly aggressive. He resented particularly the fact that one canvasser with whom he shook hands wore a bright red tie and had on yellow shoes. The insistence on department store models for suits and floor walker manners pained him. To hell with such cattle, he thought, but on the surface he smiled and shook hands and said how glad he would be to work with them. Finally, when all the introductions were over, he went back to his own department to take up the work which rushed through here like a living stream, pell-mell. His own staff, of course, much more agreeable to him. These artists who worked for him interested him, for they were, as he suspected, men very much like himself, in poor health probably, or down on their luck, and compelled to do this. He called for his assistant, Mr. Davis, whom Summerfield had introduced him as such, and asked him to let him see how the work stood. "Have you a schedule of the work in hand?" he asked easily. "Yes, sir," said his new attendant. "Let me see it." The latter brought what he called his order book and showed him just how things worked. Each particular piece of work, or order as it was called, was given a number when it came in, the time of its entry marked on the slip, the name of the artist to whom it was assigned, the time taken to execute it, and so forth. If one artist only put 2 hours on it, and another took it and put 4, this was noted. If the first drawing was a failure and a second begun, the records would show all, the slips and errors of the office as well as its speed and capacity. Eugene perceived that he must see to it that his men did not make many mistakes. After this order book had been carefully inspected by him, he rose and strolled about among the men to see how they were getting on. He wanted to familiarize himself at once with the styles and methods of his men. Some were working on clothing ads, some on designs illustrative of the beef industry, some on a railroad travel series for the streetcars, and so forth. Eugene bent over each one graciously, for he wanted to make friends with these people and win their confidence. He knew from experience how sensitive artists were, how they could be bound by feelings of good fellowship. He had a soft, easy, smiling manner which he hoped would smooth his way for him. He leaned over this man's shoulder and that, asking what the point was, how long a piece of work of that character ought to take, suggesting where a man appeared to be in doubt what he thought would be advisable. He was not at all certain of himself, this line of work being so new, but he was hopeful and eager. It was a fine sensation, this being a boss, if one could only triumph at it. He hoped to help these men to help themselves, to make them make good in ways which would bring them and him more money. He wanted more money, that $5,000 no less. "I think you have the right idea there," he said to one pale, anemic worker who looked as though he might have a lot of talent. The man, whose name was Dillon, responded to the soothing, caressing tone of his voice. He liked Eugene's appearance, though he was not at all disposed to pass favorable judgment as yet. It was already rumored that he had had an exceptional career as an artist. Summerfield had attended to that. He looked up and smiled and said, "Do you think so?" "I certainly do," said Eugene cheerfully. "Try a touch of yellow next to that blue. See if you don't like that." The artist did as requested and squinted at it narrowly. "It helps it a lot, don't it?" he observed, as though it were his own. "It certainly does," said Eugene. "That's a good idea." And somehow Dillon felt as though he had thought of it. Inside of 20 minutes the whole staff was agreeing with itself that he was a nice man to all outward appearances, and that he might make good. He appeared to be so sure. They little knew how perturbed he was inwardly, how anxious he was to get all the threads of this in his hand and to see that everything came to an ideal fruition. He dreaded the hour when he might have something to contend with which was not quite right. Days passed at this new work, and then weeks, and by degrees he grew moderately sure of himself and comparatively easy in his seat, though he realized that he had not stepped into a bed of roses. He found this a most tempestuous office to work in, for Summerfield was, as he expressed it, on the job, early and late, and tireless in his insistence and enthusiasm. He came down from his residence in the upper portion of the city at 8:50 in the morning, and remained almost invariably until 6:30 and 7, and not infrequently until 8 and 9 in the evening. He had the inconsiderate habit of keeping such of his staff as happened to be working on the thing in which he was interested until all hours of the night, sometimes transferring his deliberations to his own home, and that without dinner or the proffer of it to those whom he made to work. He would talk advertising with one big merchant or another until it was time to go home, and would then call in the weary members of his staff before they had time to escape, and begin a long and important discussion of something he wanted done. At times, when anything went wrong, he would fly into an insane fury, rave and curse, and finally, perhaps, discharge the one who was really not to blame. There were no end of labored and irritating conferences in which hard words and sarcastic references would fly about, for he had no respect for the ability or personality of anyone who worked for him. They were all more or less machines in his estimation, and rather poorly constructed ones at that. Their ideas were not good enough unless for the time being they happened to be new, or, as in Eugene's case, displaying pronounced talent. He could not fathom Eugene so readily, for he had never met anyone of his kind. He was looking closely in his case, as he was in that of all the others, to see if he could not find some weakness in his ideas. He had a gleaming, insistent, almost demoniac eye, a habit of chewing incessantly and even violently on the stub end of a cigar, the habit of twitching, getting up and walking about, stirring things on his desk, doing anything and everything to give his restless, generative energy a chance to escape. "Now, Professor," he would say when Eugene came in and seated himself quietly and unobtrusively in some corner, "we have a very difficult thing here to solve today. I want to know what you think could be done in such and such a case," describing a particular condition. Eugene would brace himself up and begin to consider, but rumination was not what Summerfield wanted from anyone. "Well, Professor, well, well," he would exclaim. Eugene would stir irritably. This was so embarrassing, in a way so degrading to him. "Come to life, Professor," Summerfield would go on. He seemed to have concluded long before that the gad was the most effective commercial weapon. Eugene would then make some polite suggestion, wishing instead that he could tell him to go to the devil. But that was not the end of it. Before all the old writers, canvassers, trade ad men, sometimes one or two of his own artists, who might be working upon the particular task in question, he would exclaim, "Lord, what a poor suggestion!" or, "Can't you do any better than that, Professor?" or, "Good heavens, I have 3 or 4 ideas better than that myself." The best he would ever say in a conference was, "Well, there may be something in that," though privately afterwards he might possibly express great pleasure. Past achievements counted for nothing, that was so plain. One might bring in gold and silver all day long. The next day there must be more gold and silver and in larger quantities. There was no end to the man's appetite. There was no limit to the speed at which he wished to drive his men. There was no limit to the venomous commercial idea as an idea. Summerfield set an example of nagging and irritating insistence, and he urged all his employees to the same policy. The result was a bear garden, a den of prize fighters, liars, cutthroats, and thieves, in which every man was for himself, openly and avowedly, and the devil take the hindmost. End of section 63. Section 64 of The Genius by Theodore Dreiser. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 2, Chapter 35. Still time went by, and although things did not improve very much in his office over the standards which he saw prevailing when he came there, he was obviously getting things much better arranged in his private life. In the first place, Angela's attitude was getting much better. The old agony which had possessed her in the days when he was acting so badly had modified as day by day she saw him working and conducting himself with reasonable circumspection. She did not trust him as yet. She was not sure that he had utterly broken with Carlotta Wilson. She had never found out who his paramour was, but all the evidence seemed to attest it. There was a telephone downstairs in a drug store by which, during his days on the world, Angela would call him up at any time, and whenever she had called him up, he was always in the office. He seemed to have plenty of time to take her to the theater if she wished to go, and to have no especial desire to avoid her company. He had once told her frankly that he did not propose to pretend to love her any more, though he did care for her, and this frightened her. In spite of her wrath and suffering, she cared for him, and she believed that he still sympathized with her and might come to care for her again, that he ought to. She decided to play the role of the affectionate wife, whether it was true or not, and to hug and kiss him and fuss over him if he would let her, just as though nothing had happened. Eugene did not understand this. He did not see how Angela could still love him. He thought she must hate him, having such grounds for having by dint of hard work and absence come out of his vast excitement about Carlotta. He was beginning to feel that he had done her a terrific injustice and to wish to make amends. He did not want to love her. He did not feel that he could. But he was perfectly willing to behave himself, to try to earn a good living, to take her to the theater and opera as opportunity permitted, and to build up and renew a social relationship with others which should act as a substitute for love. He was beginning to think that there was no honest or happy solution to any affair of the heart in the world. Most people, so far as he could see, were unhappily married. It seemed to be the lot of mankind to make mistakes in its matrimonial selections. He was probably no more unhappy than many others. Let the world wag as it would for a time, he would try to make some money now and restore himself in the eyes of the world. Later, life might bring him something. Who could tell? In the next place, their financial condition, even before he left the world, was so much better than it had been. By dint of saving and scraping, refusing to increase their expenses more than was absolutely necessary, Angela had succeeded by the time he left the world in laying by over $1,000, and since then it had gone up to $3,000. They had relaxed sufficiently so that now they were wearing reasonably good clothes, were going out and receiving company regularly. It was not possible in their little apartment, which they still occupied, to entertain more than 3 or 4 at the outside, and 2 was all that Angela ever cared to consider as either pleasurable or comfortable. But they entertained this number frequently. There were some slight recoveries of friendship and of the old life. Hudson Dula, Jerry Matthews, who had moved to Newark, William McConnell, Philip Schottmeyer, McHugh and Smite were away, one painting in Nova Scotia, the other working in Chicago. As for the old art crowd, socialists and radicals included, Eugene attempted to avoid them as much as possible. He knew nothing of the present whereabouts of Miriam Finch and Norma Whitmore. Of Christina Channing he heard much, for she was singing in grand opera, her pictures displayed in the paper and upon billboards. There were many new friends, principally young newspaper artists like Adolph Morgenbau, who took to Eugene and were in a sense his disciples. Angela's relations showed up from time to time, among them David Blue, now a sub-lieutenant in the army, with all the army officer's pride of place and station. There were women friends of Angela's for whom Eugene cared little. Mrs. Desmas, the wife of the furniture manufacturer at Riverwood, from whom they had rented their 4 rooms there, Mrs. Wertheim, the wife of the multimillionaire, to whom Monsieur Charles had introduced them. Mrs. Link, the wife of the West Point Army captain, who had come to the old Washington Square studio with Marietta, and who was now stationed at Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn, and a Mrs. Juergens, living in a neighboring apartment. As long as they were very poor, Angela was very careful how she revived acquaintances. But when they began to have a little money, she decided that she might indulge her predilection and so make life less lonesome for herself. She had always been anxious to build up social connections for Eugene, but as yet she did not see how it was to be done. When Eugene's new connection with Summerfield Company was consummated, Angela was greatly astonished and rather delighted to think that if he had to work in this practical field for long, it was to be under such comforting auspices. That is, as a superior and not as an underling. Long ago she had come to feel that Eugene would never make any money in a commercial way. To see him mounting in this manner was curious, but not wholly reassuring. They must save money, that was her one cry. They had to move soon, that was very plain. But they mustn't spend any more than they had to. She delayed until the attitude of Summerfield, upon an accidental visit to their flat, made it commercially advisable. Summerfield was a great admirer of Eugene's artistic ability. He had never seen any of his pictures, but he was rather keen to, and once when Eugene told him that they were still on display, one or two of them at Pottle Frères, Jacob Bergman's, and Henry LaRue's, he decided to visit these places, but put it off. One night, when he was riding uptown on the L road with Eugene, he decided, because he was in a vagrom mood, to accompany him home and see his pictures there. Eugene did not want this. He was chagrined to be compelled to take him into their very little apartment, but there was apparently no way of escaping it. He tried to persuade him to visit Pottle Frères instead, where one picture was still on view, but Summerfield would none of that. "I don't like you to see this place," finally he said apologetically, as they were going up the steps of the 5-story apartment house. "We are going to get out of here pretty soon. I came here when I worked on the road." Summerfield looked about at the poor neighborhood, the inlet of a canal some 2 blocks east, where a series of black coal pockets were, and to the north, where there was flat open country and a railroad yard. "Why, that's all right," he said, in his direct, practical way. "It doesn't make any difference to me. It does to you, though, Witla. You know, I believe in spending money. Everybody's spending money. Nobody gets anywhere by saving anything. Pay out, pay out. That's the idea. I found that out myself long ago. You'd better move when you get a chance soon, and surround yourself with clever people." Eugene considered this easy talk of a man who was successful and lucky, but he still thought there was much in it. Summerfield came in and viewed the pictures. He liked them, and he liked Angela, though he wondered how Eugene ever came to marry her. She was such a quiet little homebody. Eugene looked more like a bohemian or a club man now that he had been worked upon by Summerfield. The soft hat had long since been discarded for a stiff derby, and Eugene's clothes were of the most practical business type he could find. He looked more like a young merchant than an artist. Summerfield invited them over to dinner at his house, refusing to stay to dinner here, and went his way. Before long, because of his advice, they moved. They had practically $4,000 by now, and because of his salary, Angela figured that they could increase their living expenses to, say, $2,500 or even $3,000. She wanted Eugene to save $2,000 each year against the day when he should decide to return to art. They sought about together Saturday afternoons and Sundays, and finally found a charming apartment in Central Park West, overlooking the park, where they thought they could live and entertain beautifully. It had a large dining room and a living room, which, when the table was cleared away, formed one great room. There was a handsomely equipped bathroom, a nice kitchen with ample pantry, 3 bedrooms, one of which Angela turned into a sewing room, and a square hall or entry which answered as a temporary reception room. There were plenty of closets, gas and electricity, elevator service with nicely uniformed elevator men, and a house telephone. It was very different from their last place, where they only had a long dark hall, stairways to climb, gas only, and no phone. The neighborhood, too, was so much better. Here were automobiles and people walking about in the park or promenading on a Sunday afternoon, and obsequious consideration or polite indifference to your affairs from everyone who had anything to do with you. "Well, the tide is certainly turning," said Eugene, as they entered it the first day. He had the apartment redecorated in white and delft blue and dark blue, getting a set of library and dining room furniture in imitation rosewood. He bought a few choice pictures which he had seen at various exhibitions to mix with his own, and set a cut glass bowl in the ceiling where formerly the commonplace chandelier had been. There were books enough accumulated during a period of years to fill the attractive white bookcase with its lead-paned doors. Attractive sets of bedroom furniture in bird's eye maple and white enamel were secured, and the whole apartment given a very cozy and tasteful appearance. A piano was purchased outright, and dinner and breakfast sets of Haviland china. There were many other dainty accessories, such as rugs, curtains, portieres, and so forth, the hanging of which Angela supervised. Here they settled down to a comparatively new and attractive life. Angela had never really forgiven him his indiscretions of the past, his radical brutality in the last instant, but she was not holding them up insistently against him. There were occasional scenes even yet, the echoes of a far-off storm, but as long as they were making money and friends were beginning to come back, she did not propose to quarrel. Eugene was very considerate. He was very, very hard working. Why should she nag him? He would sit by a window overlooking the park at night and toil over his sketches and ideas until midnight. He was up and dressed by 7, down to his office by 8:30, out to lunch at 1 or later, and only back home at 8 or 9 o'clock at night. Sometimes Angela would be cross with him for this, sometimes rail at Mr. Summerfield for an inhuman brute, but seeing that the apartment was so lovely and that Eugene was getting along so well, how could she quarrel? It was for her benefit as much as for his that he appeared to be working. He did not think about spending money. He did not seem to care. He would work, 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 until she actually felt sorry for him. "Certainly Mr. Summerfield ought to like you," she said to him one day, half in compliment, half in rage at a man who would exact so much from him. "You're valuable enough to him. I never saw a man who could work like you can. Don't you ever want to stop?" "Don't bother about me, Angel Face," he said. "I have to do it. I don't mind. It's better than walking the streets and wondering how I'm going to get along." And he fell to his ideas again. Angela shook her head. Poor Eugene! If ever a man deserved success for working, he certainly did. And he was really getting nice again, getting conventional. Perhaps it was because he was getting a little older. It might turn out that he would become a splendid man, after all. End of section 64. Section 65 of The Genius by Theodore Dreiser. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 2, Chapter 36. There came a time, however, when all this excitement and wrath and quarreling began to unnerve Eugene and to make him feel that he could not indefinitely stand the strain. After all, his was the artistic temperament, not that of a commercial or financial genius. He was too nervous and restless. For one thing, he was first astonished, then amused, then embittered by the continual travesty of justice, truth, beauty, sympathy, which he saw enacted before his eyes. Life, stripped of its illusion and its seeming, becomes a rather deadly thing to contemplate. Because of the ruthless, insistent, inconsiderate attitude of his employer, all the employees of this place followed his example, and there was neither kindness nor courtesy, nor even raw justice anywhere. Eugene was compelled to see himself looked upon from the beginning, not so much by his own staff as by the other employees of the company, as a man who could not last long. He was disliked, forsooth, because Summerfield displayed some liking for him, and because his manners did not coincide exactly with the prevailing standard of the office. Summerfield did not intend to allow his interest in Eugene to infringe in any way upon his commercial exactions. But this was not enough to save or aid Eugene in any way. The others disliked him, some because he was a true artist to begin with, because of his rather distant air, and because in spite of himself he could not take them all as seriously as he should. Most of them seemed little mannequins to him, little second, third, and fourth editions or copies of Summerfield. They all copied that worthy's insistent air. They all attempted to imitate his briskness. Like children, they were inclined to try to imitate his bitter persiflage and be smart, and they demanded, as he said they should, the last ounce of consideration and duty from their neighbors. Eugene was too much of a philosopher not to take much of this with a grain of salt, but after all his position depended on his activity and his ability to get results, and it was a pity, he thought, that he could expect neither courtesy nor favor from anyone. Departmental chiefs stormed his room daily, demanding this, that, and the other work immediately. Artists complained that they were not getting enough pay. The business manager railed because expenses were not kept low, saying that Eugene might be an improvement in the matter of the quality of the results obtained and the speed of execution, but that he was lavish in his expenditure. Others cursed openly in his presence at times, and about him to his employer, alleging that the execution of certain ideas was rotten, or that certain work was delayed, or that he was slow or discourteous. There was little in these things, as Summerfield well knew from watching Eugene, but he was too much of a lover of quarrels and excitement as being productive of the best results in the long run to wish to interfere. Eugene was soon accused of delaying work generally, of having incompetent men, which was true, of being slow, of being an artistic snob. He stood it all calmly because of his recent experience with poverty, but he was determined to fight ultimately. He was no longer, or at least not going to be, he thought, the ambling, cowardly, dreaming Witla he had been. He was going to stand up, and he did begin to. "Remember, you are the last word here, Witla," Summerfield had told him on one occasion. "If anything goes wrong here, you're to blame. Don't make any mistakes. Don't let anyone accuse you falsely. Don't run to me. I won't help you." It was such a ruthless attitude that it shocked Eugene into an attitude of defiance. In time, he thought, he had become a hardened and changed man, aggressive, contentious, bitter. "They can all go to hell," he said one day to Summerfield, after a terrific row about some delayed pictures, in which one man, who was animated by personal animosity more than anything else, had said hard things about him. "The thing that's been stated here isn't so. My work is up to and beyond the mark. This individual here," pointing to the man in question, "simply doesn't like me. The next time he comes into my room nosing around, I'll throw him out. He's a damn fakir, and you know it. He lied here today, and you know that." "Good for you, Witla!" exclaimed Summerfield joyously. The idea of a fighting attitude on Eugene's part pleased him. "You're coming to life. You'll get somewhere now. You've got the ideas. But if you let these wolves run over you, they'll do it, and they'll eat you. I can't help it. They're all no good. I wouldn't trust a single goddamn man in the place." So it went. Eugene smiled. Could he ever get used to such a life? Could he ever learn to live with such cheap, inconsiderate, indecent little pups? Summerfield might like them, but he didn't. This might be a marvelous business policy, but he couldn't see it. Somehow it seemed to reflect the mental attitude and temperament of Mr. Daniel C. Summerfield, and nothing more. Human nature ought to be better than that. It is curious how fortune sometimes binds up the wounds of the past. covers over the broken places as with clinging vines, gives to the miseries and mental weariness of life a look of sweetness and comfort. An illusion of perfect joy is sometimes created where still, underneath, are cracks and scars. Here were Angela and Eugene living together now, beginning to be visited by first one and then the other of those they had known in the past, seemingly as happy as though no storm had ever beset the calm of their present sailing. Eugene, despite all his woes, was interested in his work. He liked to think of himself as the captain of a score of men, having a handsome office desk, being hailed as chief by obsequious subordinates, and invited here and there by Summerfield, who still liked him. The work was hard, but it was so much more profitable than anything he had ever had before. Angela was happier, too, he thought, than she had been in a long time, for she did not need to worry about money, and his prospects were broadening. Friends were coming back to them in a steady stream, and they were creating new ones. It was possible to go to a seaside resort occasionally, winter or summer, or to entertain 3 or 4 friends at dinner. Angela had a maid. The meals were served with considerable distinction under her supervision. She was flattered to hear nice things said about her husband in her presence, for it was whispered abroad in art circles, with which they were now slightly in touch again, that half the effectiveness of the Summerfield ads was due to Eugene's talent. It was no shame for him to come out now and say where he was, for he was getting a good salary and was a department chief. He, or rather the house through him, had made several great hits, issuing series of ads which attracted the attention of the public generally to the products which they advertised. Experts in the advertising world first, and then later the public generally, were beginning to wonder who it was that was primarily responsible for the hits. The Summerfield Company had not had them during the previous 6 years of its history. There were too many of them coming close together not to make a new era in the history of the house. Summerfield, it was understood about the office, was becoming a little jealous of Eugene, for he could not brook the presence of a man with a reputation, and Eugene, with his $5,000 in cash in 2 savings banks, with practically $2,500 worth of tasteful furniture in his apartment, and with a $10,000 life insurance policy in favor of Angela, was carrying himself with quite an air. He was not feeling so anxious about his future. Angela noted it, Summerfield also. The latter felt that Eugene was beginning to show his artistic superiority in a way which was not entirely pleasant. He was coming to have a direct, insistent, sometimes dictatorial manner. All the driving Summerfield had done had not succeeded in breaking his spirit. Instead, it had developed him. From a lean, pale, artistic soul, wearing a soft hat, he had straightened up and filled out until now he looked more like a business man than an artist, with a derby hat, clothes of the latest cut, a ring of oriental design on his middle finger, and pins and ties which reflected the prevailing modes. Eugene's attitude had not as yet changed completely, but it was changing. He was not nearly so fearsome as he had been. He was beginning to see that he had talents in more directions than one, to have the confidence of this fact. $5,000 in cash, with $200 or $300 being added monthly, and interest at 4% being paid upon it, gave him a reserve of self-confidence. He began to joke Summerfield himself, for he began to realize that other advertising concerns might be glad to have him. Word had been brought to him once that the Alfred Cookman Company, of which Summerfield was a graduate, was considering making him an offer, and the Twine Campbell Company, the largest in the field, was also interested in what he was doing. His own artists, mostly faithful, because he had sought to pay them well and to help them succeed, had spread his fame greatly. According to them, he was the sole cause of all the recent success which had come to the house, which was not true at all. A number, perhaps the majority, of things recently had started with him, but they had been amplified by Summerfield. worked over by the ad writing department, revised by the advertisers themselves, and so on and so forth, until notable changes had been effected and success achieved. There was no doubt that Eugene was directly responsible for a share of this. His presence was inspiring, constructive. He keyed up the whole tone of the Summerfield Company merely by being there, but he was not all there was to it by many a long step. He realized this himself. He was not at all offensively egotistic. Simply surer, calmer, more genial, less easily ruffled, but even this was too much. Summerfield wanted a frightened man, and seeing that Eugene might be getting strong enough to slip away from him, he began to think how he should either circumvent his possible sudden flight or discredit his fame, so that if he did leave he would gain nothing by it. Neither of them was directly manifesting any ill will or indicating his true feelings, but such was the situation just the same. The things which Summerfield thought he might do were not easy to do under any circumstances. It was particularly hard in Eugene's case. The man was beginning to have an air. People liked him. Advertisers who met him, the big manufacturers took note of him. They did not understand him as a trade figure, but thought he must have real force. One man, a great real estate plunger in New York, who saw him once in Summerfield's office, spoke to the latter about him. "That's a most interesting man you have there, that man Witla," he said, when they were out to lunch together. "Where does he come from?" "Oh, out west somewhere," replied Summerfield evasively. "I don't know. I've had so many art directors I don't pay much attention to them." Winfield, ex-Senator Kenyon C. Winfield of Brooklyn, perceived a slight undercurrent of opposition and belittling. "He looks like a bright fellow," he said, intending to drop the subject. He is," returned Summerfield, "but like all artists, he's flighty. They're the most unstable people in the world. You can't depend upon them. Good for one idea today, worth nothing tomorrow. I have to handle them like a lot of children. The weather sometimes makes all the difference in the world." Winfield fancied this was true. Artists generally were worth nothing in business. Still, he remembered Eugene pleasantly. As Summerfield talked here, so it was in the office and elsewhere. He began to say in the office and out that Eugene was really not doing as well as he might, that in all likelihood he would have to drop him. It was sad, but all directors, even the best of them, had their little day of ability and usefulness and then ran to seed. He did not see why it was that all these directors failed so, but they did. They never really made good in the company. By this method his own undiminished ability was made to stand out free and clear, and Eugene was not able to appear as important. No one who knew anything about Eugene, however, at this time believed this, but they did believe in the office that he might lose his position. He was too bright, too much of a leader. They felt that this condition could not continue in a one-man concern, and this made the work harder, for it bred disloyalty in certain quarters. Some of his men were disposed to counsel with the enemy. But as time passed, and in spite of the change of attitude which was coming over Summerfield, Eugene became even stronger in his own self-esteem. He was not getting vainglorious as yet, merely sure. Because of his artwork, his art connections had revived considerably, and he had heard again from such men as Louis Deesa, Monsieur Charles, Luc Severus, and others, who now knew where he was and wondered why he did not come back to painting proper. Monsieur Charles was disgusted. A great error, he said. He always spoke of him to others as a great loss to art. Strange to relate, one of his pictures was sold the spring following his entry into the Summerfield Company, and another the following winter. Each netted him $250. Pulte Faries being the agent in one case, Jacob Bergman in the other. These sales, with their consequent calls for additional canvases to show, cheered him greatly. He felt satisfied now that if anything happened to him, he could go back to his art and that he could make a living anyhow. There came a time when he was sent for by Mr. Alfred Cookman, the advertising agent for whom Summerfield had worked, but nothing came of that, for the latter did not care to pay more than $6,000 a year, and Summerfield had once told Eugene that he would eventually pay him $10,000 if he stayed with him. He did not think it was fair to leave him just then, and besides, Cookman's firm had not the force and go and prestige which Summerfield had at this time. His real chance came some 6 months later, when one of the publishing houses of Philadelphia, having an important weekly to market, began looking for an advertising manager. It was the policy of this house to select young men, and to select from among all the available candidates just the one particular one to suit the fancy of the owner, who had a record of successful effort behind him. Now Eugene was not any more an advertising manager by experience than he was an art director, but having worked for Summerfield for nearly 2 years, he had come to know a great deal about advertising, and the public thought he knew a great deal more. He knew by now just how Summerfield had his business organized. He knew how he specialized his forces, giving this line to one and that line to another. He had been able to learn by sitting in conferences and consultations what it was that advertisers wanted, how they wanted their goods displayed, what they wanted said. He had learned that novelty, force, and beauty were the keynotes, and he had to work these elements out under the most galling fire so often that he knew how it ought to be done. He knew also about commissions, rebates, long-time contracts, and so forth. And he had fancied more than once that he might run a little advertising business of his own to great profit if he could only find an honest and capable business manager or partner. Since this person was not forthcoming, he was content to bide his time. But the Calvin Publishing Company of Philadelphia had heard of him. In his search for a man, Obadiah Calvin, the founder of the company, had examined many individuals through agents in Chicago, in St. Louis, in Baltimore, Boston, and New York. But he had not yet made up his mind. He was slow in his decisions, and always flattered himself that once he made a selection, he was sure of a good result. He had not heard of Eugene until toward the end of his search, but one day in the Union Club in Philadelphia, when he was talking to a big advertising agent with whom he did considerable business, the latter said, "I hear you're looking for an advertising manager for your weekly." "I am," he said. "I heard of a man the other day who might suit you. He's with the Summerfield Company in New York. They've been getting up some very striking ads of late, as you may have noticed." "I think I have seen some of them," replied Calvin. "I'm not sure of the man's name, Witla or Gitla, or some such thing as that, but anyhow he's over there, and they say he's pretty good. Just what he is in the house I don't know. You might look him up." "Thanks, I will," replied Calvin, who was really quite grateful, for he was not quite satisfied with any of those he had seen or heard of. He was an old man, extremely sensitive to ability, wanting to combine force with refinement if he could. He was a good Christian, and was running Christian, or rather their happy correlatives, decidedly conservative publications. When he went back to his office he consulted with his business partner, a man named Fredericks, who held but a minor share in the company, and asked him if he couldn't find out something about this promising individual. Fredericks did so. He called up Cookman in New York, who was delighted to injure his old employee, Summerfield, to the extent of taking away his best man if he could. He told Fredericks that he thought Eugene was very capable, probably the most capable young man in the field, and in all likelihood the man he was looking for, a hustler. "I thought once of hiring him myself here not long ago," he told Fredericks. "He has ideas, you can see that." The next thing was a private letter from Mr. Fredericks to Mr. Witla, asking if by any chance he could come over to Philadelphia the following Saturday afternoon, indicating that there was a business proposition of considerable importance which he wished to lay before him. From the paper on which it was written, Eugene could see that there was something important in the wind, and laid the matter before Angela. The latter's eyes glistened. "I'd certainly go if I were you," she advised. he might want to make you business manager or art director or something. You can be sure they don't intend to offer you less than you're getting now. And Mr. Summerfield certainly has not treated you very well anyhow. You've worked like a slave for him, and he's never kept his agreement to raise your salary as much as he said he would. It may mean our having to leave New York, but that doesn't make any difference for a while. You don't intend to stay in this field anyhow. You only want to stay long enough to get a good sound income of your own." Angela's longing for Eugene's art career was nevertheless being slightly stilled these days by the presence and dangle lure of money. It was a great thing to be able to go downtown and buy dresses and hats to suit the seasons. It was a fine thing to be taken by Eugene Saturday afternoons and Sundays in season to Atlantic City, to Spring Lake and Shelter Island. "I think I will go," he said, and he wrote Mr. Fredericks a favorable reply. The latter met him at the Central Station in Philadelphia with his auto and took him out to his country place in the Haverford district. On the way he talked of everything but business, the state of the weather, the condition of the territory through which they were traveling, the day's news, the nature and interest of Eugene's present work. When they were in Frederick's house, where they arrived in time for dinner, and while they were getting ready for it, Mr. Obadiah Calvin dropped in, ostensibly to see his partner, but really to look at Eugene without committing himself. He was introduced to Eugene and shook hands with him cordially. During the meal he talked with Eugene a little, though not on business, and Eugene wondered why he had been called. He suspected, knowing as he did that Calvin was the president of the company, that the latter was there to look at him. After dinner Mr. Calvin left, and Eugene noted that Mr. Fredericks was then quite ready to talk with him. "The thing I wanted you to come over and see me about is in regard to our weekly and the advertising department. We have a great paper over here, as you know," he said. "We are intending to do much more with it in the future than we have in the past even. Mr. Calvin is anxious to get just the man to take charge of the advertising department. We have been looking for someone for quite a little while. Several people have suggested your name, and I'm rather inclined to think that Mr. Calvin would be pleased to see you take it. His visit here today was purely accidental, but it was fortunate. He had a chance to look at you, so that if I should propose your name, he will know just who you are. I think you would find his company a fine background for your efforts. We have no penny wise and pound foolish policy over here. We know that any successful thing is made by the men behind it, and we are willing to pay good money for good men. I don't know what you are getting where you are, and I don't care very much. If you are interested, I should like to talk to Mr. Calvin about you. And if he is interested, I should like to bring you two together for a final conference. The salary will be made right. You needn't worry about that. Mr. Calvin isn't a small man. If he likes a man, and I think he might like you, he offers you what he thinks you're worth, and you can take it or leave it. I never heard anyone complain about the salary he offered." Eugene listened with extreme self-gratulation. He was thrilled from head to toe. This was the message he had been expecting to hear for so long. He was getting $5,000 now. He had been offered $6,000. Mr. Calvin could do no less than offer him $7 or $8, possibly $10. He could easily ask $7,500. "I must say," he said innocently, "the proposition sounds attractive to me. It's a different kind of thing, somewhat, from what I have been doing, but I think I could handle it successfully. Of course, the salary will determine the whole thing. I'm not at all badly placed where I am. I just got comfortably settled in New York, and I'm not anxious to move. But I would not be opposed to coming. I have no contract with Mr. Summerfield. He has never been willing to give me one." "Well, we are not keen upon contracts ourselves," said Mr. Fredericks. "It is not a very strong reed to lean upon, anyhow, as you know. Still, a contract might be arranged if you wish it. Supposing we talk a little further to Mr. Calvin today. He doesn't live so far from here." And with Eugene's consent he went to the phone. The latter had supposed that the conversation with Mr. Calvin was something which would necessarily have to take place at some future date. But from the conversation then and there held over the phone, it appeared not. Mr. Fredericks explained elaborately over the phone, as though it was necessary, that he had been about the work of finding an advertising manager for some time, as Mr. Kalvin knew, and that he had some difficulty in finding the right man. "I have been talking to Mr. Witla, whom you met here today, and he is interested in what I have been telling him about the weekly. He strikes me, from my talk with him here, as possibly the man you are looking for. I thought you might like to talk with him further." Mr. Kalvin evidently signified his assent, for the machine was called out, and they traveled to his house, perhaps a mile away. On the way Eugene's mind was busy with the possibilities of the future. It was all so nebulous, this talk of a connection with the famous Kalvin Publishing Company, but at the same time it was so significant, so potential. Could it be possible that he was going to leave Summerfield after all, under such advantageous circumstances? It seemed like a dream. Mr. Kalvin met them in the library of his house, which stood in a spacious lawn, and which, save for the lights in the library, was quite dark and apparently lonely. And here their conversation was continued. He was a quiet man, small, gray-haired, searching in his gaze. He had, as Eugene noted, little hands and feet, and appeared as still and composed as a pool in dull weather. He said slowly and quietly that he was glad that Eugene and Mr. Fredericks had had a talk. He had heard a little something of Eugene in the past, not much. He wanted to know what Eugene thought of current advertising policies, what he thought of certain new developments in advertising method, and so on at some length. "So you think you might like to come with us," he observed dryly toward the end, as though Eugene had proposed coming. "I don't think I would object to coming under certain conditions," he replied. "And what are those conditions?" "Well, I would rather hear what you have to suggest, Mr. Kalvin. I am really not sure that I want to leave where I am. I am doing pretty well as it is." "Well, you seem a rather likely young man to me," said Mr. Kalvin. "You have certain qualities which I think I need. I'll say 8,000 for this year, and if everything is satisfactory 1 year from this time, I'll make it 10. After that, we'll let the future take care of itself." 8,000, 10 next year, thought Eugene. The title of advertising manager of a great publication. This was certainly a step forward. "Well, that isn't so bad," he said after a moment's apparent reflection. "I'd be willing to take that, I think." "I thought you would," said Mr. Kalvin with a dry smile. "Well, you and Mr. Fredericks can arrange the rest of the details. Let me wish you good luck," and he extended his hand cordially. Eugene took it. It did not seem, as he rode back in the machine with Mr. Fredericks to the latter's house, for he was invited to stay for the night, that it could really be true. 8,000 a year! Was he eventually going to become a great business man instead of an artist? He could scarcely flatter himself that this was true, but the drift was strange. 8,000 this year, 10 the next if he made good, 12, 15, 18. He had heard of such salaries in the advertising field alone, and how much more would his investments bring him? He foresaw an apartment on Riverside Drive in New York, a house in the country perhaps, for he fancied he would not always want to live in the city, an automobile of his own perhaps, a grand piano for Angela, Sheraton or Chippendale furniture, friends, fame. What artist's career could compare to this? Did any artist he knew enjoy what he was enjoying now even? Why should he worry about being an artist? Did they ever get anywhere? Would the approval of posterity let him ride in an automobile now? He smiled as he recalled Dula's talk about class superiority, the distinction of being an artist, even though poor. Poverty be hanged. Posterity could go to the devil. He wanted to live now, not in the approval of posterity. End of section 65. Section 66 of The Genius by Theodore Dreiser. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 2, Chapter 37. The best positions are not always free from the most disturbing difficulties, for great responsibility goes with great opportunity. But Eugene went gaily to his new task, for he knew that it could not possibly be much more difficult than the one he was leaving. Truly, Summerfield had been a terrible man to work for. He had done his best by petty nagging, insisting on endless variations, the most frank and brutal criticism, to break down Eugene's imperturbable good nature, and make him feel that he could not reasonably hope to handle the situation without Summerfield's cooperation and assistance. But he had only been able, by doing so, to bring out Eugene's better resources. His self-reliance, coolness under fire, ability to work long and ardently, even when his heart was scarcely in it, were all strengthened and developed. "Well, luck to you, Witla," he said, when Eugene informed him one morning that he was going to leave and wished to give him notice. "You needn't take me into consideration. I don't want you to stay if you're going to go. The quicker the better. These long drawn-out agonies over leaving don't interest me. There's nothing in that. Clinch the job today if you want it. I'll find someone." Eugene resented his indifference, but he only smiled a cordial smile in reply. "I'll stay a little while if you want me to, 1 or 2 weeks. I don't want to tie up your work in any way." "Oh, no, no, you won't tie up my work. On your way and good luck." The little devil, thought Eugene, but he shook hands and said he was sorry. Summerfield grinned imperturbably. He wound up his affairs quickly and got out. "Thank God," he said the day he left, "I'm out of that hell hole." But he came to realize afterward that Summerfield had rendered him a great service. He had forced him to do his best and utmost, which no one had ever done before. It had told in his character, his spiritual make-up, his very appearance. He was no longer timid and nervous, but rather bold and determined looking. He had lost that fear of very little things, for he had been sailing through stormy seas. Little storms did not, could never again really frighten him. He had learned to fight. That was the one great thing Summerfield had done for him. In the offices of Calvin Company it was radically different. Here was comparative peace and quiet. Calvin had not fought his way up by clubbing little people through little difficulties, but had devoted himself to thinking out a few big things and letting them, because of their very bigness and newness, make their own way and his. He believed in big men, honest men, the biggest and most honest he could find. He saw something in Eugene, a tendency toward perfection perhaps, which attracted him. The formalities of this new arrangement were soon concluded, and Eugene came into his new and beautiful offices, heralded by the word recently passed about that he was a most charming man. He was greeted by the editor, Townsend Miller, in the most cordial manner. He was met by his assembled staff in the most friendly spirit. It quite took Eugene's breath away to realize that he was the responsible head of some 15 capable advertising men here in Philadelphia alone, to say nothing of 8 or more in a branch office in Chicago, and traveling canvassers in the different parts of the country, the far west, the south, the southwest, the Canadian northwest. His material surroundings were much more imposing than they had been with the Summerfield Company. The idea of all these men was to follow up business, to lay interesting propositions before successful merchants and manufacturers who had not yet tried the columns of the North American Weekly, to make contracts which should be mutually advantageous to the advertiser and the weekly, and to gain and retain goodwill according to the results rendered. It was no very difficult task in connection with the North American Weekly to do this, because owing to a novel and appealing editorial policy, it was already in possession of a circulation of 500,000 a week, and was rapidly gaining more. It was not difficult, as Eugene soon found, to show advertisers in most cases that this was a proposition in which worthwhile results could be obtained. What with Eugene's fertility in suggesting new methods of advertising, his suaveness of approach and geniality in laying before the most recalcitrant his very desirable schemes, his ability to get ideas and suggestions out of his men in conference, he was really in no danger of not being able to hold his own, and indeed was destined to make a rather remarkable showing. Eugene and Angela settled into what might have been deemed a fixed attitude of comfort and refinement. Without much inconvenience to himself, and with little friction among those about, he had succeeded in reorganizing his staff along lines which were eminently satisfactory to himself. Some men who were formerly with the Summerfield Company were now with him. He had brought them because he found he could inculcate in them the spirit of sympathetic relationship and good understanding, such as Calvin desired. He was not making the progress which Summerfield was making with really less means at his command, but then, on the other hand, this was a rich company which did not ask or expect any such struggle as that which Summerfield had been and was still compelled to make for himself. The business ethics of this company were high. It believed in clean methods, good salaries, honest service. Calvin liked him, and he had one memorable conversation with Eugene some time after he came there, almost a year, which stuck in his memory and did him much good. Calvin saw clearly wherein both his strength and weaknesses lay, and once said to Fredericks, his business manager, "The one thing I like about that man is his readiness with ideas. He always has one, and he's the most willing man to try I ever knew. He has imagination. He needs to be steadied in the direction of sober thought so that he doesn't promise more than he can fulfill. Outside this, I see nothing the matter with him." Fredericks agreed. He liked Eugene also. He did as much as he could to make things smooth, but of course Eugene's task was personal and to be worked out by him solely. Calvin said to him when it became necessary to raise his salary, "I've watched your work for a year now, and I'm going to keep my word and raise your salary. You're a good man. You have many excellent qualities which I need and want in the man who sits at that desk. But you also have some failings. I don't want you to get offended. A man in my position is always like a father who sits at the head of a family, and my lieutenants are like my sons. I have to take an interest in them because they take an interest in me. Now, you've done your work well, very well, but you are subject to one fault which may sometime lead into trouble. You are a little too enthusiastic. I don't think you stop to think enough. You have a lot of ideas. They swarm in your head like bees, and sometimes you let them all out at once, and they buzz around you and confuse you and everyone else connected with you. You would really be a better man if you had, not less ideas. I wouldn't say that, but better control of them. You want to do too many things at once. Go slow, take your time. You have lots of time. You're young yet. Think. If you're in doubt, come down and consult with me. I'm older in this business than you are, and I'll help you all I can." Eugene smiled and said, "I think that's true." "It is true," said Calvin. "And now I want to speak of another thing which is a little more of a personal matter, and I don't want you to take offense, for I'm saying it for your benefit. If I'm any judge of men, and I flatter myself sometimes that I am, you're a man whose greatest weakness lies, and mind you, I have no actual evidence to go upon, not one scrap. Your greatest weakness lies perhaps not so much in the direction of women as in love of luxury generally, of which women might become, and usually are, a very conspicuous part." Eugene flushed the least bit nervously and resentfully, for he thought he had conducted himself in the most circumspect manner here. In fact, everywhere since the days he had begun to put the Riverwood incident behind him. "Now I suppose you wonder why I say that. Well, I raised 2 boys, both dead now, and one was just a little like you. You have so much imagination that it runs not only to ideas in business, but ideas in dress and comfort and friends and entertainment. Be careful of the kind of people you get in with. Stick to the conservative element. It may be hard for you, but it's best for you, materially speaking. You're the kind of man, if my observations and intuitions are correct, who is apt to be carried away by his ideals of anything, beauty, women, show. Now, I have no ascetic objection to women, but to you they are dangerous as yet. At bottom, I don't think you have the making of a real cold business man in you, but you are a splendid lieutenant. I'll tell you frankly, I don't think a better man than you has ever sat or could sit in that chair. You are very exceptional, but your variability makes you an uncertain quantity. You're just on the threshold of your career. This additional $2,000 is going to open up new opportunities to you. Keep cool. Keep out of the hands of clever people. Don't let subtle women come near you. You're married, and for your sake I hope you love your wife. If you don't, pretend to, and stay within the bounds of convention. Don't let any scandal ever attach to you. If you do, it will be absolutely fatal so far as I am concerned. I have had to part with a number of excellent men in my time because a little money turned their heads and they went wild over some one woman or many women. Don't you be that way. I like you. I'd like to see you get along. Be cold if you can. Be careful. Think. That's the best advice I can give you, and I wish you luck." He waved him a dismissal, and Eugene rose. He wondered how this man had seen so clearly into his character. It was the truth, and he knew it was. His inmost thoughts and feelings were evidently written where this man could see them. Fittingly, he was president of a great company. He could read men. He went back into his office and decided to take this lesson to heart. He must keep cool and sane always. "I guess I've had enough experience to know that, though, by now," he said, and dismissed the idea from his mind. For this year and the year following, when his salary was raised to $12,000, Eugene flourished prodigiously. He and Miller became better friends than ever. Miller had advertising ideas which were of value to Eugene. Eugene had art and editorial ideas which were of value to Miller. They were together a great deal at social functions, and were sometimes hailed by their companions as the Calvin Kids and the Limelight Twins. Eugene learned to play golf with Miller, though he was a slow student and never good, and also tennis. He and Mrs. Miller, Angela and Townsend, frequently made a set on their own court or over at Miller's. They automobiled and rode a great deal. Eugene met some charming women, particularly young ones at dances, of which he had become very fond, and at dinners and receptions. They and the Millers were invited to a great many affairs, but by degrees it became apparent to him, as it did to Miller and Mrs. Miller, that his presence was much more desired by a certain type of smart woman than was that of his wife. "Oh, he is so clever," was an observation which might have been heard in various quarters. Frequently the compliment stopped there, and nothing was said of Angela, or later on it would come up that she was not quite so nice. Not that she was not charming and worthy and all that, but you know, my dear, she isn't quite so available. You can't use her as you can some women. It was at this time that Angela first conceived the notion seriously that a child might have a sobering effect on Eugene. She had, in spite of the fact that for some time now they had been well able to support one or more, and in spite also of the fact that Eugene's various emotional lapses indicated that he needed a sobering weight of some kind, steadily objected in her mind to the idea of subjecting herself to this ordeal. To tell the truth, aside from the care and worry which always, owing to her early experience with her sister's children, had been associated in her mind with the presence of them, she was decidedly afraid of the result. She had heard her mother say that most girls in their infancy showed very clearly whether they were to be good, healthy mothers or not, and whether they were to have children. And her recollection was that her mother had once said that she would not have any children. She half believed it to be impossible in her case, though she had never told this to Eugene, and she had guarded herself jealously against the chance of having any. Now, however, after watching Eugene all these years, seeing the drift of his present mood, feeling the influence of prosperity on him, she wished sincerely that she might have one, without great danger or discomfort to herself, in order that she might influence and control him. He might learn to love it. The sense of responsibility involved would have its effect. People would look to him to conduct himself soberly under these circumstances, and he probably would. He was so subject to public opinion now. She thought of this a long time, wondering, for fear and annoyance were quite strong influences with her, and she did nothing immediately. She listened to various women who talked with her from time to time about the child question, and decided that perhaps it was very wrong not to have children, at least one or two, that it was very likely possible that she could have one if she wanted to. A Mrs. Sanafori, who called on her quite frequently in Philadelphia, she met her at the Millers, told her that she was sure she could have one even if she was past the usual age for first babies, for she had known so many women who had. "If I were you, Mrs. Witla, I would see a doctor," she suggested one day. "He can tell you. I'm sure you can if you want to. They have so many ways of dieting and exercising you which make all the difference in the world. I'd like to have you come some day and see my doctor, if you will." Angela decided that she would, for curiosity's sake, and in case she wished to act in the matter sometime, and was informed by the wiseacre who examined her that in his opinion there was no doubt she could. She would have to subject herself to a strict regimen. Her muscles would have to be softened by some form of manipulation. Otherwise, she was apparently in a healthy, normal condition and would suffer no intolerable hardship. This pleased and soothed Angela greatly. It gave her a club wherewith to strike her lord, a chain wherewith to bind him. She did not want to act at once. It was too serious a matter. She wanted time to think, but it was pleasant to know that she could do this, unless Eugene sobered down now. During the time in which he had been working for the Summerfield Company, and since then for the Calvin Company here in Philadelphia, Eugene, in spite of the large salary he was receiving, more each year, really had not saved so much money. Angela had seen to it that some of his earnings were invested in Pennsylvania Railroad stock, which seemed to her safe enough, and in a plot of ground 200 by 200 feet at Upper Montclair, New Jersey, near New York, where she and Eugene might some day want to live. His business engagements had necessitated considerable personal expenditures. His opportunity to enter the Baltusrol Golf Club, the Erie Tennis Club, the Philadelphia Country Club, and similar organizations had taken annual sums not previously contemplated, and the need of having a modest automobile, not a touring car, was obvious. His short experience with that served as a lesson, however, for it was found to be a terrific expense, entirely disproportionate to his income. After paying for endless repairs, salarying a chauffeur wearisomely, and meeting with an accident which permanently damaged the look of his machine, he decided to give it up. They could rent autos for all the uses they would have, and so that luxury ended there. It was curious, too, how during this time their Western home relations fell rather shadowily into the background. Eugene had not been home now for nearly 2 years, and Angela had seen only David of all her family since she had been in Philadelphia. In the fall of their 3rd year there, Angela's mother died, and she returned to Blackwood for a short time. The following spring, Eugene's father died. Myrtle moved to New York. Her husband, Frank Bangs, was connected with a Western furniture company which was maintaining important showrooms in New York. Myrtle had broken down nervously and taken up Christian Science. Eugene heard. Henry Burgess, Sylvia's husband, had become president of the bank with which he had been so long connected, and had sold his father's paper, the Alexandria appeal, when the latter suddenly died. Marietta was promising to come to Philadelphia next year, in order, as she said, that Eugene might get her a rich husband. But Angela informed him privately that Marietta was now irrevocably engaged, and would, the next year, marry a wealthy Wisconsin lumberman. Everyone was delighted to hear that Eugene was doing so well, though all regretted the lapse of his career as an artist. His fame as an advertising man was growing, and he was thought to have considerable weight in the editorial direction of the North American Weekly. So he flourished. End of section 66. Section 67 of The Genius by Theodore Dreiser. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 2, Chapter 38. It was in the fall of the third year that the most flattering offer of any was made him, and that without any seeking on his part, for he was convinced that he had found a fairly permanent berth and was happy among his associates. Publishing and other trade conditions were at this time in a peculiar condition, in which lieutenants of any importance in any field might well be called to positions of apparently extraordinary prominence and trust. Most of the great organizations of Eugene's day were already reaching a point where they were no longer controlled by the individuals who had founded and constructed them, but had passed into the hands of sons or holding companies or groups of stockholders, few of whom knew much, if anything, of the business with which they were called to engineer and protect. Hiram C. Colfax was not a publisher at all at heart. He had come into control of the Swinton Scudder Davis Company by one of those curious manipulations of finance which sometimes give the care of sheep into the hands of anything but competent or interested shepherds. Colfax was sufficiently alert to handle anything in such a way that it would eventually make money for him, even if that result were finally attained by parting with it. In other words, he was a financier. His father had been a New England soap manufacturer, and having accumulated more or less radical ideas along with his wealth, had decided to propagandize in favor of various causes. The single tax theory of Henry George for one, socialism for another, the promotion of reform ideas in politics generally. He had tried in various ways to get his ideas before the public, but had not succeeded very well. He was not a good speaker, not a good writer, simply a good money maker and fairly capable thinker, and this irritated him. He thought once of buying or starting a newspaper in Boston, but investigation soon showed him that this was a rather hazardous undertaking. He next began subsidizing small weeklies which should advocate his reforms, but this resulted in little. His interest in pamphleteering did bring his name to the attention of Martin W. Davis of the Swinton Scudder Davis Company, whose imprint on books, magazines, and weeklies was as common throughout the length and breadth of the land as that of Oxford is upon the English Bible. The Swinton Scudder Davis Company was in sad financial straits. Intellectually, for various reasons, it had run to seed. John Jacob Swinton and Owen V. Scudder, the men with book, magazine, and true literary instincts, were long since dead. Mr. Davis had tried, for the various heirs and assigns involved, to run it intelligently and honestly, but intelligence and honesty were of little value in this instance without great critical judgment. This he had not. The house had become filled with editors, readers, critics, foremen of manufacturing and printing departments, business managers, art directors, traveling salesmen, and so on without end, each of whom might be reasonably efficient if left alone, but none of whom worked well together, and all of whom used up a great deal of money. The principal literary publication, a magazine of great prestige, was in the hands of an old man who had been editor for nearly 40 years. A weekly was being run by a boy, comparatively a youth of 29. A second magazine, devoted to adventure fiction, was in the hands of another young man of 26. The National Critical Monthly was in the hands of salaried critics of great repute and uncompromising attitude. The book department was divided into the hands of juvenile editor, a fiction editor, a scientific and education editor, and so on. It was Mr. Davis's task to see that competent overseers were in charge of all departments, so that they might flourish and work harmoniously under him. But he was neither sufficiently wise nor forceful to fill the role. He was old and was veered about first by one theory and then by another, and within the house were rings and cliques. One of the most influential of these, the most influential, in fact, was one which was captained and led by Florence J. White, an Irish-American, who, as business manager, and really more than that, general manager under Davis, was in charge of the manufacturing and printing departments, and who, because of his immense budgets for paper, ink, printing, mailing, and distribution generally, was in practical control of the business. He it was whom, with Davis's approval, said how much was to be paid for paper, ink, composition, press work, and salaries generally. He it was who, through his henchman, the head of the printing department, arranged the working schedules by which the magazines and books were to reach the presses, with the practical power to say whether they were to be on time or not. It was he who, through another superintendent, supervised the mailing and the stock room, and by reason of his great executive ability, was coming to have a threatening control over the advertising and circulation departments. The one trouble with White, and this was something which would affect any man who should come in through Davis's auspices, was that he knew nothing of art, literature, or science, and cared less, his only interest being in manufacture. He had risen so rapidly on the executive side that his power had outrun his financial means. Davis, the present head above him, had no means beyond his own depreciated share. Because of poor editorial judgment, the books and magazines were tottering through a serious loss of prestige to eventual failure. Something had to be done, for at that time the expenditure for 3 years past had been much greater than the receipts. So Marshall P. Colfax, the father of Hiram Colfax, had been appealed to, because of his interest in reform ideas, which might be to a certain extent looked upon as related to literature, and because he was reported to be a man of great wealth. Rumor reported his fortune as being anywhere between 6 and 8 millions. The proposition which Davis had to put before him was this: that he buy from the various heirs and assigns the whole of the stock outside his, Davis's, own, which amounted to somewhere about 65%, and then come in as managing director and reorganize the company to suit himself. Davis was old. He did not want to trouble himself about the future of this company or risk his own independent property. He realized as well as anyone that what the company needed was new blood. A receivership at this juncture would injure the value of the house in print very much indeed. White had no money, and besides, he was so new and different that Davis scarcely understood what his ambitions or his true importance might be. There was no real intellectual sympathy between them. In the main, he did not like White's temperament, and so in considering what might be done for the company, he passed him by. Various consultations were held. Colfax was greatly flattered to think that this proposition should be brought to his attention at all. He had 3 sons, only one of whom was interested in the soap business. Edward and Hiram, the 2 youngest, wanted nothing to do with it. He thought this might be an outlet for the energies of one or both of them, preferably Hiram, who was more of an intellectual and scientific turn than the others, though his chief interests were financial, and besides, these books and publications would give him the opportunity which he had long been seeking. His personal prestige might be immensely heightened thereby. He examined carefully into the financial phases of the situation, using his son Hiram, whose financial judgment he had faith in, as an accountant and mouthpiece, and finally, after seeing that he could secure the stock on a long-term consideration for a very moderate valuation, $1,500,000, while it was worth $3,000,000, he had his son Hiram elected director and president, and proceeded to see what could be done with the company. In this approaching transaction, Florence J. White had seen his opportunity and seized it. He had realized on sight that Hiram would need and possibly appreciate all the information and assistance he could get, and being in a position to know, he had laid all the facts in connection with the house plainly before him. He saw clearly where the trouble lay, the warring factions, the lack of editorial judgment, the poor financial manipulations. He knew exactly where the stock was and by what representations it could be best frightened and made to release itself cheaply. He worked vigorously for Hiram because he liked him, and the latter reciprocated his regard. "You've been a prince in this transaction, White," he said to that individual one day. "You put things practically in my hands. I'm not going to forget it." "Don't mention it," said White. "It is to my interest to see a real live man come in here." "When I become president, you become vice president, and that means $25,000 a year." White was then getting 12. "When I become vice president, nothing will ever happen to your interests," returned the other man grimly. White was 6 feet tall, lean, savage, only semi-articulate. Colfax was small, wiry, excitable, with enough energy to explode a cartridge by yelling at it. He was eager, vainglorious, in many respects brilliant. He wanted to shine in the world, and he did not know how to do it as yet exactly. The two shook hands firmly. Some 3 months later Colfax was duly elected director and president, and the same meeting that elected him president elected Florence J. White vice president. The latter was for clearing out all the old elements and letting in new blood. Colfax was for going slow, until he could see for himself what he wanted to do. 1 or 2 men were eliminated at once, an old circulation man and an old advertising man. In 6 months, while they were still contemplating additional changes and looking for new men, Colfax Sr. died, and the Swinton Scudder Davis Company, or at least Mr. Colfax's control of it, was willed to Hiram. So he sat there, accidentally president, and in full charge, wondering how he should make it a great success, and Florence J. White was his henchman and sworn ally. At the time that Colfax first heard of Eugene, he had been in charge of the Swinton Scudder Davis Company, which he was planning to reincorporate as the United Magazine Corporation, for 3 years. He had made a number of changes, some radical, some conservative. He had put in an advertising man whom he was now finding unsatisfactory, and he had made changes in the art and editorial departments which were more the result of the suggestions of others, principally of White, than the thoughts of his own brain. Martin W. Davis had retired. He was old and sick and unwilling to ruminate in a back-room position. Such men as the editor of the National Review, Swinton's Magazine, and the Scudder's Weekly were the only figures of importance about the place, and they were now of course immensely subsidiary to Hiram Cox and Florence White. The latter had introduced a rather hard, bitter atmosphere into the place. He had been raised under difficult conditions himself in a back street in Brooklyn, and had no sympathy with the airs and intellectual insipidities which characterized the editorial and literary element which filled the place. He had an Irishman's love of organization and politics, but far and away above that he had an Irishman's love of power. Because of the trick he had scored in winning the favor of Hiram Colfax at the time when the tremendous affairs of the concern were in a state of transition, he had become immensely ambitious. He wanted to be, not nominally, but actually, director of the affairs of this house under Colfax. He saw his way clear to do it by getting editors, art directors, department heads, and assistants generally who were agreeable to him. But unfortunately he could not do this directly, for while Colfax cared little about the details of the business, his hobby was just this one thing: men. Like Obadiah Calvin, of the Calvin Publishing Company, who, by the way, was now his one great rival, Colfax prided himself on his ability to select men. His general idea was that if he could find one more man as good as Florence White to take charge of the art, editorial, and book end of the business, not from the manufacturing and commercial, but from the intellectual and spiritual ends, a man with ideas who would draw to him authors, editors, scientific writers, and capable assistants generally, the fortune of the house would be made. He thought, sanely enough, from some points of view, that this publishing world could be divided in this way: White bringing the inside manufacturing, purchasing, and selling interests to a state of perfection, the new man, whoever he might be, bringing the ideas of the house and their literary and artistic representation up to such a state of efficiency that the whole country would know that it was once more powerful and successful. He wanted to be called the foremost publisher of his day, and then he could retire gracefully or devote himself to other financial matters as he pleased. He really did not understand Florence J. White as well as he did himself. White was a past master at dissembling. He had no desire to see any such thing as Colfax was now planning to come to pass. He could not do the things intellectually and spiritually which Colfax wanted done. Nevertheless, he wanted to be king under this emperor, the real power behind the throne, and he did not propose to brook any interference if he could help it. It was in his power, having the printing and composing room in his hands, to cause any man whom he greatly disliked to suffer severely. Forms could be delayed, material lost, complaints lodged as to dilatoriness in the matter of meeting schedules, and so on ad infinitum. He had the Irishman's love of chicanery in the matter of morals. If he could get at an enemy's record, and there was a flaw in it, the facts were apt to become mysteriously known at the most inconvenient times. He demanded the utmost loyalty of those who worked under him. If a man did not know enough instinctively to work intelligently for his interests, while at the same time appearing to serve the interests of the house at large only, he was soon dismissed on one pretext or another. Intelligent department heads, not sure of their own strength, and seeing which way the wind was blowing, soon lined up in his course. Those whom he liked and who did his will prospered. Those whom he disliked suffered greatly in their duties, and were forever explaining or complaining to Colfax, who was not aware of White's subtlety, and who therefore thought them incompetent. Colfax, when he first heard of Eugene, was still cherishing his dream of a literary and artistic primate who should rank in power with White. He had not found him as yet, for all the men he sincerely admired and thought fitted for the position were in business for themselves. He had sounded one man after another, but to no satisfactory end. Then it became necessary to fill the position of advertising manager with someone who would make a conspicuous success of it, and he began to sound various authorities. Naturally he looked at the different advertising men working for various publications, and quickly came to the name of Eugene Witla. The latter was rumored to be making a shining success of his work. He was well liked where he was. 2 different business men told Colfax that they had met him and that he was exceptionally clever. A third told him of his record with Summerfield, and through a fourth man who knew Eugene and who was having him to lunch at the Hardware Club a few weeks later, Colfax had a chance to meet him without appearing to be interested in him in any way. Not knowing who Colfax was, or rather very little, other than that he was president of this great rival publishing concern, Eugene was perfectly free and easy in his manner. He was never affected at any time, decidedly eager to learn things from anybody, and supremely good-natured. "So you're Swinton, Scudder, and Davis, are you?" he said to Colfax on introduction. "That trinity must have shrunk some to get condensed into you. But I suppose the power is all there." "Oh, I don't know about that. I don't know about that," exclaimed Colfax electrically. He was always ready, like a greyhound, to run another a race. "They tell me Swinton and Scudder were exceptionally big men. If you have as much force as you have length, there's nothing the matter with you, though." "Oh, I'm all right," said Eugene, "when I'm by myself. These little men worry me, though. They're so darn smart." Colfax cackled ecstatically. He liked Eugene's looks. The latter's manner, easy and not in any way nervous or irritable, but coupled with a heavenly alertness of eye, took his fancy. It was a fit companion for his own terrific energy, and it was not unduly soft or yielding. "So you're the advertising manager of the North American. How'd they ever come to tie you down to that?" "They didn't tie me," said Eugene. "I just laid down. But they put a nice fat salary on top of me to keep me there. I wouldn't lie down for anything except a salary." He grinned smartly. Colfax cackled. "Well, my boy, it doesn't seem to be hurting your ribs, does it? They've not caved in yet. They've not, have they? Eugene studied this little man with great interest. He was taken by his sharp, fierce, examining eye. He was so different from Calvin, who was about his size, but so much more quiet, peaceful, dignified. Colfax was electric, noisy, insistent, like a pert jack-in-the-box. He seemed to be nothing but energy. Eugene thought of him as having an electric body coated over with some thin veneer of skin. He seemed as direct as a flash of lightning. "Doing pretty good over there, are you?" he asked. "I've heard a little something about you from time to time. Not much, not much. Just a little. Not unfavorable, though. Not unfavorable." "I hope not," said Eugene easily. He wondered why Colfax was so interested in him. The latter kept looking him over, much as one might examine a prize animal. Their eyes would meet, and Colfax's would gleam with a savage but friendly fire. "Well," said Eugene to him finally. "I'm just thinking, my boy, I'm just thinking," he returned, and that was all Eugene could get out of him. It was not long after this very peculiar meeting, which stuck in Eugene's memory, that Colfax invited him over to his house in New York to dinner. "I wish," he wrote one day, not long after this meeting, "that the next time you are in New York you would let me know. I would like to have you come to my house to dine. You and I ought to be pretty good friends. There are a number of things I would like to talk to you about." This was written on the paper of the United Magazine Corporation, which had just been organized to take over the old company of Swinton, Scudder and Davis, and was labeled "The Office of the President." Eugene thought this was significant. Could Colfax be going to make him an offer of some kind? Well, the more the merrier. He was doing very well indeed, and he liked Mr. Calvin very much. In fact, all his surroundings, but as an offer was a testimonial to merit and could be shown as such, he would not be opposed to receiving it. It might strengthen him with Calvin if it did nothing else. He made an occasion to go over, first talking the letter over with Angela, who was simply curious about the whole thing. He told her how much interested Colfax appeared to be the first time they met, and that he fancied it might mean an offer from the United Magazine Corporation at some time or other. "I'm not particularly anxious about it," said Eugene, "but I'd like to see what is there." Angela was not sure that it was wise to bother with it. "It's a big firm," she said, "but it isn't bigger than Mr. Calvin's. And he's been mighty nice to you. You'd better not do anything to injure yourself with him." Eugene thought of this. It was sound advice. Still, he wanted to hear. "I won't do anything," he said. "I would like to hear what he has to say, though." A little later he wrote that he was coming on the 20th, and that he would be glad to take dinner with Colfax. The first meeting between Eugene and Colfax had been conclusive so far as future friendship was concerned. These two, like Eugene and Summerfield, were temperamentally in accord, though Colfax was very much superior to Summerfield in his ability to command men. This night, when they met at dinner at Colfax's house, the latter was most cordial. Colfax had invited him to come to his office, and together they went uptown in his automobile. His residence was in Upper Fifth Avenue, a new white marble fronted building with great iron gates at the door, and a splendid entry set with small palms and dwarf cedars. Eugene saw at once that this man was living in that intense atmosphere of commercial and financial rivalry which makes living in New York so keen. You could feel the air of hard, cold order about the place, the insistence on perfection of appointment, the compulsion toward material display which was held in check only by that sense of fitness which knowledge of current taste and the mode in everything demanded. His automobile was very large and very new, the latest model, a great dark blue affair which ran as silently as a sewing machine. The footman who opened the door was 6 feet tall, dressed in knee breeches and a swallow-tailed coat. The valet was a Japanese, silent, polite, attentive. Eugene was introduced to a Mrs. Colfax, a most graceful but somewhat self-conscious woman. The French maid later presented 2 children, a boy and a girl. Eugene by now had become used to luxury in various forms, and this house was not superior to many he had seen, but it ranked with the best. Colfax was most free in it. He threw his overcoat to the valet carelessly and tossed his babies in the air by turn. When they were presented to him by the French maid, his wife, slightly taller than himself, received a resounding smack. "There's Sita," he exclaimed, a diminutive for Cecile, as Eugene subsequently learned. "How do you like that, eh? Meet Mr. Witla. He's an artist and an art director and an advertising manager and—" "A most humble person," put in Eugene smilingly. "Not half as bad as you may think. His report is greatly exaggerated." Mrs. Colfax smiled sweetly. "I discount much of what he says at once," she returned. "More later. Won't you come up into the library?" They ascended together, jesting. Eugene was pleased with what he saw. Mrs. Colfax liked him. She excused herself after a little while, and Colfax talked life in general. "I'm going to show you my house now, and after dinner I'm going to talk a little business to you. You interest me. I may as well tell you that." "Well, you interest me, Colfax," said Eugene genially. "I like you." "You don't like me any more than I like you. That's a sure thing," replied the other. End of section 67. Section 68 of The Genius by Theodore Dreiser. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 2, Chapter 39. The results of this evening were most pleasant, but in some ways disconcerting. It became perfectly plain that Colfax was anxious to have Eugene desert the Calvin Company and come over to him. "You people over there," he said to him at one stage of the conversation, "have an excellent company, but it doesn't compare with this organization which we are revising. Why, what are your 2 publications to our 7? You have one eminently successful one, the one you're on, and no book business whatsoever. We have 7 publications all doing excellently well, and a book business that is second to none in the country. You know that. If it hadn't been that the business had been horribly mismanaged, it would never have come into my hands at all. Why, Witla, I want to tell you one little fact in connection with that organization which will illustrate everything else which might be said in connection with it before I came here. They were wasting $20,000 a year on ink alone. We were publishing 100 absolutely useless books that did not sell enough to pay for the cost of printing, let alone the paper, plates, type work, and cost of distribution. I think it's safe to say we lost over $100,000 a year that way. The magazines were running down. They haven't waked up sufficiently yet to suit me, but I'm looking for men. I'm really looking for one man eventually who will take charge of all that editorial and artwork and make it into something exceptional. He wants to be a man who can handle men. If I can get the right man, I will even include the advertising department, for that really belongs with the literary and art sections. It depends upon the man." He looked significantly at Eugene, who sat there stroking his upper lip with his hand. "Well," he said thoughtfully, "that ought to make a very nice place for someone. Who have you in mind?" "No one as yet that I'm absolutely sure of. I have one man in mind who I think might come to fill the position after he had had a look about the organization and a chance to study its needs a little. It's a hard position to hold. It requires a man with imagination, tact, judgment. He would have to be a sort of Vice Colfax, for I can't give my attention permanently to that business. I don't want to. I have bigger fish to fry. But I want someone who will eventually be my other self in these departments, who can get along with Florence White and the men under him and hold his own in his own world. I want a sort of bipartisan commission down there, each man supreme in his own realm." "It sounds interesting," said Eugene thoughtfully. "Who's your man?" "As I say, he isn't quite ready yet, in my judgment, but he is near it. And he's the right man. He's in this room now. You're the man I'm thinking about, Witla." "No," said Eugene quietly. "Yes, you," replied Colfax. "You flatter me," he said, with a deprecatory wave of his hand. "I'm not so sure that he is." "Oh, yes, he is, if he thinks he is," replied Colfax emphatically. "Opportunity doesn't knock in vain at a real man's door. At least, I don't believe it will knock here and not be admitted. Why, the advertising department of this business alone is worth $18,000 a year to begin with." Eugene sat up. He was getting 12. Could he afford to ignore that offer? Could the Kalvin Company afford to pay him that much? They were paying him pretty well as it was. Could the Kalvin Company offer him the prospects which this company was offering him? "What is more, I might say," went on Colfax, "the general publishing control of this organization, the position of managing publisher, which I am going to create, and which, when you are fitted for it, you can have, will be worth $25,000 a year, and that oughtn't to be so very far away either." Eugene turned that over in his mind without saying anything. This offer, coming so emphatically and definitely at this time, actually made him nervous and fearsome. It was such a tremendous thing to talk about. The literary, art, and advertising control of the United Magazines Corporation. Who was this man White? What was he like? Would he be able to agree with him? This man beside him was so hard, so brilliant, so dynamic. He would expect so much. And then his work with Townsend Miller and under Mr. Kalvin. How much he had learned of the editorial game by merely talking and planning with these two men. He had got the whole idea of timely topics, of big progressive national forecasts and features, of odd departments and interesting pieces of fiction and personality studies, from talking with Miller alone. Kalvin had made clear to him what constituted great craftsmanship. Of course, long before, he had suspected just how it was, but in Philadelphia he had sat in conference with Miller and Kalvin and knew. He had practically managed the former's little art department for him, without paying much attention to it either. Could he really handle this greater thing if he tried? If he didn't, someone else would. Would the man who would be so much greater than himself? "I'm not anxious that you should act hastily," said Colfax soothingly, after a little bit, for he saw that Eugene was debating the question solemnly, and that it was a severe problem for him. "I know how you feel. You have gone into the Kalvin Company, and you've made good. They've been nice to you. It's only natural that they should be. You hate to leave. Well, think it over. I won't tempt you beyond your best judgment. Think it over. There's a splendid chance here. Just the same, I like you, and I think you are the man to get away with it. Come down to my place tomorrow, and let me show you what we have. I want to show our resources. I don't think you know how big this thing really is." "Yes, I do," replied Eugene, smiling. "It certainly is a fascinating proposition, but I can't make up my mind about it now. It's something I want to think about. I'd like to take my time, and I'll let you know." "Take all the time you want, my boy. Take all the time you want," exclaimed Colfax. "I'll wait for you a little while. I'm in no life or death hurry. This position can't be filled satisfactorily in a minute. When you're ready, let me know what you decide. And now, let's go to the theater. What do you say?" The automobile was called. Mrs. Colfax and her guest, Miss Janier, appeared. There was an interesting evening in a box, with Eugene talking gaily and entertainingly to all, and then an after-theater bite at Sherry's. The next morning, for he stayed all night at the Colfaxes, they visited the United Magazine Corporation building together, and at noon Eugene returned to Philadelphia. His head was fairly seething and ringing with all he had seen and heard. Colfax was a great man, he thought, greater in some respects than Calvin. He was more forceful, more enthusiastic, younger, more like himself than Calvin. He could never fail. He was too rich. He would make a success of this great corporation, a tremendous success, and if he went he might help make it with him. What a thing that would be! Very different from working for a corporation with whose success he had never had anything to do. Should he ignore this offer? New York, a true art and literary standing, a great executive and social standing, fame, money, all these were calling. Why, on 18 or 25,000 he could have a splendid studio apartment of his own, say on Riverside Drive. He could entertain magnificently. He could keep an automobile without worrying about it. Angela would cease feeling that they had to be careful. It would be the apex of lieutenantship for him. Beyond that, he would take stock in the company or a business of his own. What a long distance he had come from the days when, here as a boy, he had walked the streets wondering where he would find a $3 room, and when, as an art failure, he carried his paintings about and sold them for $10 and $15. Dear heaven, what peculiar tricks fortune could play! The discussion with Angela of this proposition led to some additional uncertainty, for although she was greatly impressed with what Colfax offered, she was afraid Eugene might be making a mistake in leaving Calvin. The latter had been so nice to Eugene. He had never associated with him in any intimate way, but he and Angela had been invited to his home on several formal occasions, and Eugene had reported that Calvin was constantly giving him good advice. His attitude in the office was not critical, but analytic and considerate. "He's been mighty nice to me," Eugene said to her one morning at breakfast. "They all have. It's a shame to leave him. And yet, now that I look at it, I can see very plainly that there is never going to be the field here that there will be with the United Company. They have the publications and the book business, and the Calvin Company hasn't and won't have. Calvin is too old. They're in New York too. That's one thing I like about it. I'd like to live in New York again, wouldn't you?" "It would be fine," said Angela, who had never really cared for Philadelphia and saw visions of tremendous superiority in this situation. Philadelphia had always seemed a little out of the way of things after New York and Paris. Only Eugene's good salary and the comforts they had experienced here had made it tolerable. "Why don't you speak to Mr. Calvin and tell him just what Mr. Colfax says?" she asked. "It may be that he'll offer to raise your salary so much that you'll want to stay when he hears of this." "No danger," replied Eugene. "He may raise it a bit, but he never can pay me $25,000 a year. There isn't any reason for paying it. It takes a corporation like the United to do it. There isn't a man in our place gets that unless it's Fredericks. Besides, I could never be anything more here, or much more, than advertising manager. Miller has that editorial job sewed up. He ought to have it too. He's a good man. This thing that Colfax offers lets me out into a new field. I don't want to be an advertising manager all my days if I can help it." "I don't want you to be either, Eugene," sighed Angela. "It's a shame you can't quit entirely and take up your art work. I always thought that if you were to stop now and go to painting, you would make a success of it. There's nothing the matter with your nerves now. It's just a question of whether we want to live more simply for a while and let you work at that. I'm sure you'd make a big success of it." "Art doesn't appeal to me so much as it once did," replied Eugene. "I've lived too well, and I know a lot more about living than I once did. Where could I make $12,000 a year painting? If I had 100,000 or a couple of 100,000 laid aside, it would be a different thing, but I haven't. All we have is that Pennsylvania Railroad stock and those lots in Montclair eating their merry little heads off in taxes, and that Steele common stock. If we go back to New York, we ought to build on that Montclair property and rent it if we don't want to live in it. If I quit now we wouldn't have more than $2,000 a year outside of what I could earn. And what sort of life can you live on that?" Angela saw, disappearing under those circumstances, the rather pleasant world of entertainment in which they were disporting themselves. Art distinction might be delightful, but would it furnish such a table as they were sitting at this morning? Would they have as nice a home and as many friends? Art was glorious, but would they have as many rides and automobile trips as they had now? Would she be able to dress as nicely? It took money to produce a variety of clothing, house, street, evening, morning, and other wear. Hats at $35 and $40 were not in the range of artist wives as a rule. Did she want to go back to a simpler life for his art's sake? Wouldn't it be better to have him go with Mr. Colfax and make $25,000 a year for a while, and then have him retire? "You'd better talk to Mr. Kalvin," she counseled. "You'll have to do that anyhow. See what he says. After that, you can decide what you must do." Eugene hesitated, but thinking it all over, he decided that he would. One morning, not long after, when he met Mr. Kalvin in the main hall on the editorial floor, he said, "I'd like to talk to you for a few moments sometime today alone, Mr. Kalvin, if you can spare me the time." "Certainly. I'm not busy now," returned the president. "Come right down. What is it you want to see me about?" "Well, I tell you," said Eugene, when they had reached the former's office and he had closed the door, "I've had an offer that I feel that I ought to talk to you about. It's a pretty fascinating proposition, and it's troubling me. I owe it to you as well as to myself to speak about it." "Yes, what is it?" said Kalvin considerately. "Mr. Colfax of the United Magazine Corporation came to me not long ago and wanted to know if I would not come with him. He offers me $18,000 a year as advertising manager to begin with, and a chance to take charge of all the art and editorial ends as well a little later at $25,000. He calls it the managing publishing end of the business. I've been thinking of it seriously, for I've handled the art and advertising ends here and at the Summerfield Company, and I have always imagined that I knew something of the book and magazine business. I know it's a rather large proposition, but I'm not at all sure that I couldn't handle it." Mr. Kalvin listened quietly. He saw what Colfax's scheme was and liked it as a proposition. It was a good idea, but needed an exceptional man for the position. Was Eugene that man? He wasn't sure of that, and yet perchance he might be. Colfax, he thought, was a man of excellent financial, if not publishing judgment. He might, if he could get the proper person, make an excellent success of his business. Eugene interested him, perhaps more at first flash than he would later. This man before him had a most promising appearance. He was clean, quick, with an alert mind and eye. He could see how, because of Eugene's success here, Colfax was thinking of him being even more exceptional than he was. He was a good man, a fine man, under direction. Would Colfax have the patience, the interest, the sympathy to work with and understand him? "Now let's think about that a little, Witla," he said quietly. "It's a flattering offer. You'd be foolish if you didn't give it careful consideration. Do you know anything about the organization of that place over there?" "No," replied Eugene, "nothing except what I learned by casually going over it with Mr. Colfax." "Do you know much about Colfax as a man?" "Very little. I've only met him twice. He's forceful, dramatic, a man with a lot of ideas. I understand he's very rich, 3 or 4 millions, someone told me." Kalvin's hand moved indifferently. "Do you like him?" "Well, I can't say yet absolutely whether I do or don't. He interests me a lot. He's wonderfully dynamic. I'm sure I'm favorably impressed with him." "And he wants to give you charge eventually of all the magazines and books, the publishing end?" "So he says," said Eugene. "I'd go a little slow if I were saddling myself with that responsibility. I'd want to be sure that I knew all about it. You want to remember, Witla, that running one department under the direction and with the sympathetic assistance and consideration of someone over you is very different from running 4 or 5 departments on your own responsibility, with no one over you except someone who wants intelligent guidance from you. Colfax, as I understand him, isn't a publisher, either by tendency or training or education. He's a financier. He'll want you, if you take that position, to tell him how it shall be done. Now, unless you know a great deal about the publishing business, you'll have a difficult task in that. I don't want to appear to be throwing cold water on your natural ambition to get up in the world. You're entitled to go higher if you can. No one in your circle of acquaintances would wish you more luck than I will if you decide to go. I want you to think carefully of what you are doing. Where you are here, you are perfectly safe, or as nearly safe as any man who behaves himself and maintains his natural force and energy can be. It's only natural that you should expect more money in the face of this offer, and I shall be perfectly willing to give it to you. I intended, as you possibly expected, to do something better for you by January. I'll say now that if you want to stay here, you can have $14,000 now, and possibly $16,000 in a year or a year and a half from now. I don't want to overload this department with what I consider an undue salary. I think $16,000, when it is paid, will be high for the work that is done here. But you're a good man, and I'm perfectly willing to pay it to you. The thing for you to do is to make up your mind whether this proposition which I now make you is safer and more in accord with your desires than the one Mr. Colfax makes you. With him, your $18,000 begins at once. With me, $16,000 is a year away, anyhow. With him, you have promise of an outlook which is much more glittering than you can reasonably hope for here. But you want to remember that difficulties will be, of course, proportionately greater. You know something about me by now. You still, and don't think I want to do him any injustice, I don't, have to learn about Mr. Colfax. Now, I advise you to think carefully before you act. Study the situation over there before you accept it. The United Magazine Corporation is a great concern. I have no doubt that under Mr. Colfax's management it has a brilliant future in store for it. He is an able man. If you finally decide to go, come and tell me, and there will be no hard feelings one way or the other. If you decide to stay, the new salary arrangements goes into effect at once. As a matter of fact, I might as well have Mr. Fredericks credit that up to you so that you can say that you have drawn that sum here. It won't do you any harm. Then we can run along as before. I know it isn't good business as a rule to try and keep a man who has been poisoned by a bigger offer, and because I know that is the reason why I am only offering you $14,000 this year, I want to be sure that you are sure that you want to stay. See?" He smiled. Eugene arose. "I see," he said. "You are one of the best men I have ever known, Mr. Kalvin. You have constantly treated me with more consideration than I ever expected to receive anywhere. It has been a pleasure and a privilege to work for you. If I stay, it will be because I want to, because I value your friendship." "Well," said Kalvin quietly, "that's very nice, I'm sure, and I appreciate it, but don't let your friendship for me or your sense of gratitude stop you from doing something you think you ought to do. Go ahead if you feel like it. I won't feel the least bit angry with you. I'll feel sorry. But that's neither here nor there. Life is a constant condition of readjustment, and every good business man knows it." He took Eugene's extended hand. "Good luck," he said, "whatever you do," his favorite expression. End of section 68. Section 69 of The Genius by Theodore Dreiser. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 2, Chapter 40. The upshot of Eugene's final speculation was that he accepted the offer of the United Magazine Corporation and left Mr. Kalvin. Colfax had written one day to his house asking him what he thought he would do about it. The more he had turned it over in his mind, the more it had grown in attraction. The Colfax Company was erecting a tremendous building, 18 stories high, in the heart of the middle business district in New York, near Union Square, to house all their departments. Colfax had said at the time Eugene took dinner with him that the 16th, 17th, and 18th floors would be devoted to the editorial, publication, circulation, art, and advertising departments. He had asked Eugene what he had thought would be a good floor arrangement, and the latter, with his usual facility for scheming such things, had scratched out on a piece of paper a tentative layout for the various departments. He had put the editorial and art departments on the topmost floor, giving the publisher, whoever he might eventually prove to be, a commanding position in a central room on the western side of the building, which overlooked all the city between the square and Hudson River, and showed that magnificent body of water as a panorama for the eye to feast upon. He had put the advertising and some overflow editorial rooms on the 17th floor, and the circulation with its attendant mailing and cabinet record rooms on the 16th. The publishers' and editors' rooms he laid out after an old Flemish scheme he had long had in mind, in which green, dark blue, blood red, and black walnut shades contrasted richly with the flood of light which would be available. "You might as well do this thing right, if you do it at all," he had said to Colfax. "Nearly all the editorial offices I have ever seen have been the flimsiest makeshifts. A rich-looking editorial, art, and advertising department would help your company a great deal. It has advertising value." He recalled, as he spoke, Summerfield's theory that a look of prosperity was about the most valuable asset a house could have. Colfax agreed with him, and said when the time came that he wished Eugene would do him the favor to come and look the thing over. "I have 2 good architects on the job," he explained, "but I would rather trust your ideas as to how those rooms should be laid out." When he was considering this final call for a decision, he was thinking how this floor would look, how rich it would be. Eventually, if he succeeded, his office would be the most sumptuous thing in it. He would be the most conspicuous figure in the great new building, apart from Colfax himself. Thoughts of this kind, which ought to have had but very little share in any commercial speculation, were nevertheless uppermost in Eugene's mind. For he was not a business man. He was primarily an artist, and for all his floundering around in the commercial world, he remained an artist still. His sense of his coming dignity and standing before the world was almost greater than his sense of the terrifying responsibility which it involved. Colfax was a hard man, he knew, harder even than Summerfield, for he talked less and acted more. But this did not sink into Eugene's consciousness sufficiently to worry him. He fancied he was a strong man and able to hold his own anywhere. Angela was not really very much opposed to the change, though her natural conservatism made her worry and hesitate to approve. It was a great step forward if Eugene succeeded, but if he failed, it would be such a loss. "Colfax has so much faith in me," he told her. "He's convinced that I can do it, and faith like that is a great help. I'd like to try it anyhow. It can't do me any harm. If I think I can't handle the publishing proposition, I'll stick to the advertising end." "All right," said Angela, "but I scarcely know what to advise. They've been so nice to you over here." "I'll try it," said Eugene determinedly. Nothing ventured, nothing have, and he informed Kalvin the same day. The latter looked at him solemnly, his keen gray eyes contemplating the situation from all points of view. "Well, Eugene," he said, "you're shouldering a great responsibility. It's difficult. Think carefully of everything that you do. I'm sorry to see you go. Goodbye." He had the feeling that Eugene was making a mistake, that he would do better to rest a while where he was, but persuasion was useless. It would only give Eugene the notion that he was more important than he was, make matters more difficult in the future. Calvin had heard a number of things concerning Colfax recently, and he fancied that Eugene might find it hard to deal with him later. The general impression was that he was subject to sudden likes and dislikes, which did not bear the test of time. He was said to be scarcely human enough to be the effective head of a great working corporation. The truth was that this general opinion was quite correct. Colfax was as hard as steel, but of a smiling and delightful presence to those he fancied. Vanity was really his other name, and ambition with him knew no bounds. He hoped to make a tremendous success of his life, to be looked up to as an imposing financier, and he wanted men, only strong men, about him. Eugene seemed to Colfax to be a strong man, and the day he finally communicated with him, saying that he thought that he would accept his offer, but that he wished to talk to him further, Colfax threw his hat up in the air, slapped his side partner White on the back, and exclaimed, "Whee, Florrie! There's a trick I've scored for this corporation. There's a man, unless I'm greatly mistaken, who will do something here. He's young, but he's all right. He's got the looks on you and me, Florrie, but we can stand that, can't we?" White eyed him with a show of joy and satisfaction which was purely simulated. He had seen many editors and many advertising men in his time. To his judgment, they were nearly all lightweights, men who were easily satisfied with the little toy wherewith he or anyone might decide to gratify their vanity. This was probably another case in point, but if a real publisher were coming in here, it would not be so well with him. He might attempt to crowd in on his authority, or at least divide it with him. That did not appeal to his personal vanity. It really put a stumbling block in his path, for he hoped to rule here some day alone. Why was it that Colfax was so eager to have the authority in this house divided? Was it because he was somewhat afraid of him? He thought so, and he was exceedingly close to the truth when he thought so. "Florrie's a good lieutenant," Colfax said to himself, "but he needs to be counterbalanced here by someone who will represent the refinements and that intellectual superiority which the world respects." He wanted this refinement and intellectual superiority to be popular with the public, and to produce results in the shape of increased circulations of his magazines and books. These two would then act as checks to each other, thus preventing the house from becoming overweight in either direction. Then he could drive this team as a grand master, the man who had selected both, whose ideas they represented, and whose judgment they respected. The world of finance and trade would know they were nothing without him. What Eugene thought and what White thought of this prospective situation was that the other would naturally be the minor figure, and that he, under Colfax, would be the shining light. Eugene was convinced that the house, without its proper artistic and intellectual dominance, was nothing. White was convinced that without sane commercial management it was a failure, and that this was the thing to look to. Money could buy brains. Colfax introduced Eugene to White on the morning he arrived to take charge, for on the previous occasions when he had been there, White was absent. The two looked at each other and immediately suspended judgment, for both were able men. Eugene saw White as an interesting type, tall, leathery, swaggering, a backstreet bully evolved into the semblance of a gentleman. White saw in Eugene a nervous, refined, semi-emotional literary and artistic type, who had, however, a curious versatility and virility not common among those whom he had previously encountered. He was exceedingly forceful, but not poised. That he could eventually undermine him, if he could not dominate him, he did not doubt. Still, he was coming in with the backing of Colfax and a great reputation. It might not be easy. Eugene made him feel nervous. He wondered as he looked at him whether Colfax would really make him general literary, artistic, and advertising administrator, or whether he would remain simply advertising manager as he now entered. Colfax had not accepted Eugene for more than that. "Here he is, Florrie," Colfax had said of Eugene in introducing him to White. "This is the man I've been talking about. Witla, Mr. White. White, Mr. Witla. You two want to get together for the good of this house in the future. What do you think of each other?" Eugene had previously noted the peculiarity of this rowdy, rah-rah attitude on the part of Colfax. He seemed to have no sense of the conventions of social address and conference at any time. "Now, by God!" Colfax exclaimed, striking his right fist against his left palm. "Unless I'm greatly mistaken, this house is going to begin to move. I'm not positive that I have the man I want, but I think I have. White, let's stroll around and introduce him." White swaggered to the office door. "Sure," he said quietly. "An exceptional man," he said to himself. Colfax was almost beside himself with satisfaction, for he was subject to emotional flushes which, however, related to self-aggrandizement only. He walked with a great stride, little as he was, which was his wont when he was feeling particularly satisfied. He talked in a loud voice, for he wanted everyone to know that he, Hiram Colfax, was about and as forceful as the lord of so great an institution should be. He could yell and scream something like a woman in a paroxysm of rage when he was thwarted or irritated. Eugene did not know that as yet. "Here's one of the printing floors," he said to Eugene, throwing open a door which revealed a room full of thundering presses of giant size. "Where's Dodson, boy? Where's Dodson? Tell him to come here. He's foreman of our printing department," he added, turning to Eugene, as the printer's devil, who had been working at the press, scurried away to find his master. "I told you, I guess, that we have 30 of these presses. There are 4 more floors just like this." "So you did," replied Eugene. "It's certainly a great concern. I can see that the possibilities of a thing like this are almost limitless." "Limitless, I should say. It depends upon what you can do with this," and he tapped Eugene's forehead. "If you do your part right, and he does his," turning to White, "there won't be any limit to what this house can do. That remains to be seen." Just then Dodson came bustling up, a shrewd, keen henchman of White's, and looked at Eugene curiously. "Dodson, Mr. Witla, the new advertising manager. He's going to try to help pay for all this wasteful press work you're doing. Witla, Mr. Dodson, manager of the printing department." The two men shook hands. Eugene felt in a way as though he were talking to an underling and did not pay very definite attention to him. Dodson resented his attitude somewhat, but he gave no sign. His loyalty was to White, and he felt himself perfectly safe under that man's supervision. The next visit was to the composing room, where a vast army of men were working away at type racks and linotype machines. A short, fat, ink-streaked foreman, in a green striped apron that looked as though it might have been made of bed ticking, came forward to greet them ingratiatingly. He was plainly nervous at their presence, and withdrew his hand when Eugene offered to take it. "It's too dirty," he said. "I'll take the will for the deed, Mr. Witla." More explanations and laudations of the extent of the business followed. Then came the circulation department with its head, a tall, dark man who looked solemnly at Eugene, uncertain as to what place he was to have in the organization and uncertain as to what attitude he should ultimately have to take. White was butting into his affairs, as he told his wife, and he did not know where it would end. He had heard rumors to the effect that there was to be a new man soon, who was to have great authority over various departments. Was this he? There came next the editors of the various magazines, who viewed this triumphal procession with more or less contempt. For to them both Colfax and White were raw, uncouth upstarts, blazoning their material superiority in loud-mouthed phrases. Colfax talked too loud and was too vainglorious. White was too hard, bitter, and unreasoning. They hated them both with a secret hate, but there was no escaping their domination. The need of living salaries held all in obsequious subjection. "Here's Mr. Marchwood," Colfax said inconsiderately of the editor of the International Review. "He thinks he's making a wonderful publication of that, but we don't know whether he is yet or not." Eugene winced for Marchwood. He was so calm, so refined, so professional. "I suppose we can only go by the circulation department," he replied simply, attracted by Eugene's sympathetic smile. "That's all, that's all!" exclaimed Colfax. "That is probably true," said Eugene, "but a good thing ought to be as easily circulated as a poor one. At least it's worth trying." Mr. Marchwood smiled. It was a bit of intellectual kindness in a world of cruel comment. "It's a great institution," said Eugene finally, on reaching the president's office again. "I'll begin now and see what I can do." "Good luck, my boy, good luck," said Colfax loudly. "I'm laying great stress on what you're going to do, you know." "Don't lean too hard," returned Eugene. "Remember, I'm just one in a great organization." I know. But the one is all I need. Up there, the one. See?" "Yes, yes," laughed Eugene. "Cheer up. We'll be able to do a little something, I'm sure." "A great man, that," Colfax declared to White as he went away. "The real stuff in that fellow. No flinching there, you notice. He knows how to think. Now, Florrie, unless I miss my guess, you and I are going to get somewhere with this thing." White smiled gloomily, almost cynically. He was not so sure. Eugene was pretty good, but he was obviously too independent, too artistic, to be really stable and dependable. He would never run to him for advice, but he would probably make mistakes. He might lose his head. What must he do to offset this new invasion of authority? Discredit him? Certainly, but he needn't worry about that. Eugene would do something. He would make mistakes of some kind. He felt sure of it. He was almost positive of it. End of section 69. Section 70 of The Genius by Theodore Dreiser. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 2, Chapter 41. The opening days of this their second return to New York were a period of great joy to Angela. Unlike that first time, when she was returning after 7 months of loneliness and unhappiness to a sick husband and a gloomy outlook, she was now looking forward to what, in spite of her previous doubts, was a glorious career of dignity, prosperity, and abundance. Eugene was such an important man now. His career was so well marked and in a way almost certified. They had a good bit of money in the bank. Their investments in stocks, on which they obtained a uniform rate of interest of about 7%, aggregated $30,000. They had 2 lots, 200 by 200, in Montclair, which were said to be slowly increasing in value, and which Eugene now estimated to be worth about $6,000. He was talking about investing what additional money he might save in stocks bearing better interest or some sound commercial venture. When the proper time came a little later, he might even abandon the publishing field entirely and renew his interest in art. He was certainly getting near the possibility of this. The place which they selected for their residence in New York was in a new and very sumptuous studio apartment building on Riverside Drive near 79th Street, where Eugene had long fancied he would like to live. This famous thoroughfare and showplace, with its restricted park atmosphere, its magnificent and commanding view of the lordly Hudson, its wondrous woods of color and magnificent sunsets, had long taken his eye. When he had first come to New York, it had been his delight to stroll here, watching the stream of fashionable equipages pour out towards Grant's Tomb and return. He had sat on a park bench many an afternoon at this very spot or farther up, and watched the gay company of horsemen and horsewomen riding cheerfully by, nodding to their social acquaintances, speaking to the park keepers and road scavengers, in a condescending and superior way, taking their leisure in a comfortable fashion and looking idly at the river. It seemed a wonderful world to him at that time. Only millionaires could afford to live there, he thought. So ignorant was he of the financial tricks of the world. These handsomely garbed men in riding coats and breeches, the chic-looking girls in stiff black hats, trailing black riding skirts, yellow gloved, and sporting short whips which looked more like dainty canes than anything else, took his fancy greatly. It was his idea at that time that this was almost the apex of social glory, to be permitted to ride here of an afternoon. Since then he had come a long way and learned a great deal. But he still fancied this street as one of the few perfect expressions of the elegance and luxury of metropolitan life, and he wanted to live on it. Angela was given authority, after discussion, to see what she could find in the way of an apartment of say 9 or 11 rooms, with 2 baths or more, which should not cost more than $3,000 or $3,500. As a matter of fact, a very handsome apartment of 9 rooms and 2 baths, including a studio room 18 feet high, 40 feet long, and 22 feet wide, was found at the now, to them, comparatively moderate sum of $3,200. The chambers were beautifully finished in old English oak, carved and stained after a very pleasing 15th century model, and the walls were left to the discretion of the incoming tenant. Whatever was desired in the way of tapestries, silks, or other wall furnishings would be supplied. Eugene chose green-brown tapestries representing old Rhine castles for his studio, and blue and brown silks for his wall furnishings elsewhere. He now realized a long-cherished dream of having the great wooden cross of brown-stained oak ornamented with a figure of the bleeding Christ, which he set in a dark shaded corner behind 2 immense wax candles, set in tall, heavy bronze candlesticks, the size of small bedposts. These, when lighted in an otherwise darkened room and flickering ruefully, cast a peculiar spell of beauty over the gay throngs which sometimes assembled there. A grand piano in old English oak occupied one corner. A magnificent music cabinet in French burnt woodwork stood nearby. There were a number of carved and fluted high-backed chairs, a carved easel with one of his best pictures displayed, a black marble pedestal bearing a yellow-stained marble bust of Nero, with his lascivious, degenerate face showing grimly at the world, and 2 gold-plated candelabra of 11 branches each hung upon the north wall. 2 wide, tall windows with storm sashes, which reached from the floor to the ceiling, commanded the west view of the Hudson. Outside one was a small stone balcony wide enough to accommodate 4 chairs, which gave a beautiful cool view of the drive. It was shielded by an awning in summer and was 9 stories above the ground. Over the water of the more or less peaceful stream were the stacks and outlines of a great factory, and in the roadstead lay boats always, war vessels, tramp freighters, sailboats, and up and down past the endless traffic of small craft always so pleasant to look upon in fair or foul weather. It was a beautiful apartment, beautifully furnished, in which most of their furniture, brought from Philadelphia, fitted admirably. It was here that at last they settled down to enjoy the fruit of that long struggle and comparative victory which brought them so near their much desired goal, an indestructible and unchangeable competence which no wind or ill fortune could readily destroy. Eugene was quite beside himself with joy and satisfaction at thus finding himself and Angela eventually surrounded by those tokens of luxury, comfort, and distinction which had so long haunted his brain. Most of us go through life with the furniture of our prospective castle well outlined in mind, but with never the privilege of seeing it realized. We have our pictures, our hangings, our servitors well and ably selected. Eugene's were real at last. End of Section 70.